Boom, and we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Turbo Makes Games YouTube channel. I'm, of course, Johnny, joined by my good friend, Danny. Danny, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Danny. Oh, well, actually, my name is Daniel, though often you will see me online as Danny, both on the Turbo Make Games Discord and on the official YouTube channel. No, not the YouTube channel. What am I talking about? The Discord. I am one of the developers for Entities, specifically. So, dots and entities and iAssistant and iJob entity and all that jazz. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, exciting stuff. Yeah, very excited to have you here. I definitely, like you were mentioning kind of with your name, I like to play around with it because, there's another famous game developer named Danny. And so
Yes.
if you saw the little preview that I did in my previous video for this, I was having a little bit of fun with that. So yeah, anyways, welcome in. Excited to be here. Yeah, basically, we kind of wanted to do this little stream to sort of celebrate the release of Entities 1.0 now that Unity's 2022 LTS is fully out in the wild. ECS is 1.0 is fully, production ready, certified for development and all that. So yeah, definitely exciting time. So again, we just kind of wanted to, celebrate this a little bit, talk a little bit about dots and ECS. And Danny, you came up with this really cool idea where, basically, we could have people in the audience, of course you can ask your questions about just general DOTS and ECS stuff. But if there was any, specific game mechanics or systems or cool things that you're maybe trying to figure out how to implement with DOTS and ECS, go ahead, feel free to mention those in the chat and we can kind of, do a live brainstorming session and, figure out how you might be able to take care of those things. So it looks like we have a number of people in the chat here already. So welcome in everybody. Excited to have you all in here today. So yeah, I guess we can maybe just get into it, just kind of, talking about yourself a little bit, just give us a quick rundown of, kind of your experience before Unity and how you got involved in Unity, what kinds of things you were doing when you started at Unity and kind of how you worked to where you are today.
Yeah, I definitely. What did I do before? Well, obviously, I loved playing games as a kid. And
any types of games specifically?
Minecraft. I was a big Minecraft fan. I was
Nice.
also a big Lego fan, actually.
Oh, me too.
Like one of my friends came over one time, and his dad had just been allowed to, from his company, get this specific type of Lego, which had like a built-in programming language to it.
Oh yeah, are you talking about the Lego Mindstorms? Yeah.
And so that was my first time trying out programming.
Yeah, same here. Same here. That's hilarious.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh, this is really fun. I get to like make Lego and I get to like program with my own things, and it's almost like a mini game, but you make a robot that moves around.
Yeah.
And then I played a bunch of Minecraft, and there was this mod called Computercraft.
Okay.
Which let you program Lua in the game. So that was my first experience, like actual text programming.
Got you.
And yeah, that obviously spawned my interest for actually making games, and so I think I started with Game Maker, and then like right after I started playing around with Unity. I think it was like back in 2012 or 13 or something. It was very soon after that they made it free for everyone to try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then yeah, how did you get connected with Unity and everything?
Yeah. Well, actually, it was a weird thing because obviously I've been using Unity since that point, making games, and then like in 2015 I participated in a camp called Game Development Camp, which is this yearly camp that teaches how to make a game during 1 week. And when we did that, I just knew I wanted to get into game development, and they showed a study called Meteorology, and that's the next thing I did. I studied at university at a study called Meteorology. During my studies, I saw on LinkedIn this little job posting saying, we're looking for a student developer that wants to help make dots a reality. And amazingly, also at the time, I was very curious about this posting because, for one thing, I had the 6 months prior to that posting been like really down, the rapid tunnel of like, what is DoD, what is all this stuff
interesting.
about. Also, especially because like, I don't know if you know the YouTube channel Game Maker's Toolkit. It's quite popular.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
He did a video on like Jonathan Blow's very specific like puzzle type of design, and so I got very curious about like, okay, who is this Jonathan Blow guy? And like,
the goat.
Some videos, and he kept talking about this talk by Mike Acton. I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch the video and like see what this
interesting.
And then I was like, oh, that really like fits with me, and it also kind of reminds me of this other thing that I remember disagreeing a lot with, like 2 years prior, a video called OOP is bad or something.
That's Brian Will's. That's Brian Will's video, right?
Now I actually agree with him.
That's Brian Will's video, right?
Exactly, that's Brian Will's
video. Who now is at Unity.
and then I was like, okay, well, now I want to try this entities thing because that pointed me over to that. And so, I went down the rabbit hole of trying out entities and making a few projects with it. And then I sent off my job posting just as like a whim. I didn't even think anything would happen of it because, like, why would they pick me? Like, they must have 1,000 candidates. I'm just some random guy that has tried it.
Interesting. So it was already kind of ECS was already kind of like public at this point. Yes. when you started applying, so they were already kind of like in development, and they really just wanted to kind of start scaling it up.
Like 0.17 at that point.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
So it was still like, or it was a little bit mature at that point. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. And so what did you first start doing on dots?
One of the first things they had me doing was convert over some. They were just starting to remove iJob for each.
Okay.
The old implementation that
yeah.
iJob entity. And so my first task, like they had made a small prototype version of iJob entity, but it was missing all the the nice error messages. So it would just randomly generate random errors and nothing. And so my first job was just to like convert over the iJob read tests that they had into iJob entity tests, and then make those tests actually valid. Like they would generate a proper error from that.
Yeah, and then I think probably around that time is when we started seeing all like the smiley faces and all the error messages. I think that's.
Yes.
I was like,
that's exactly right. Yeah, and then like it just moved on from there because obviously by that point I had already contributed quite a lot to iJob entity, and I also renamed because I was really annoyed by a name called iSystem base, so I named it iSystem instead.
There you go. iSystem is your baby.
Yes, exactly. I also think that we're getting a lot of questions.
Yeah. I see a bunch coming through, so maybe we can kind of start transitioning over to those. Let me see if I can increase your volume by chance. They say you're a little bit quiet. Let me just see if I can take care of that real quick. We'll do this. All right, go ahead and talk a little bit.
Sure, I can. If let's hope it helps.
I'm gonna turn you down just a tad.
Any
there.
thoughts about DOS physics for 2D?
Well, here let's go ahead and take these from the top because I saw a bunch of good ones coming in here. So, all right, let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and create some tutorials. Can you recommend tools? Yeah, for me, I assume you mean like video tutorials. So. For me, I use Adobe Premiere. I think it works okay. I definitely have some crashes with it and things like that. But I know DaVinci Resolve is another great option. It's a free editing software that's very powerful, and it will be another good one to look into. But really, just as long as you have something that you can kind of stitch together your voice over some you showing some code is really all you need to do. let's see what else. Just finishing up on reading the 1.0 docs. So glad they finally released 1.0. Me too. It is definitely exciting times. How does it feel? From your side, being on the inside of Unity, like, what's the kind of general vibe? Is everyone super excited that 1.0 is out?
I mean, it's definitely a lot of both, because we're very excited to like start seeing projects from it, and we're also very excited that now people, also can trust that the things that are there is also what will be there for a while. Like the whole point of like releasing a 1.0 version is obviously that it matches LCS and that it also has the same support as LCS.
Yeah.
Developed for quite a while, so we get to see people start playing around with it, and that's the very exciting bit. Like we there are some of us that feel it's a little early, maybe, but we're very happy to see it out there.
Awesome. And yeah, how's it been, like, now that you're like seeing more people kind of adopt it? Like, how's it kind of been?
Really cool. I mean, just looking at both the official Unity Discord and also your own, I can clearly see that like it's definitely gotten to the point where more and more people are trying it out.
Yeah, definitely. And even on my like Entities 1.0 tutorial video, I've definitely seen like a spike of views uptick kind of since that it's been fully public. So that's definitely exciting.
Yeah.
So let's see. How do you do terrain in ECS? Do you have any kind of thoughts on that?
Well, the same way that you kind of normally would. I mean, so there's no specific ECS terrain system as of today.
Right.
And so what you do is the same as always. You either use the built-in Unity terrain system, or you go to your DCC program of choice, Houdini, Blender, all the classics, and start splitting up some of those into like chunks, so it's a little easier to develop and stream in. Like you don't want to make a whole city and have that loaded in all the time. You kind of want to have it's segmented into little chunks that you can load in.
Yeah, definitely. That reminds me of something that I want to ask you about a little bit later. But yeah, no, you definitely can use the existing terrain tools, and those meshes can just get converted over to entities, so everything kind of works on them. And there are definitely some good tools on the asset store if you want to do any terrain generation that's maybe have a little bit more of a feature set than the built-in Unity tools have as well. So another one, animation system.
Yeah, that's a classic one.
So officially the Unity Dots, their own animation system. That one is still, you can see it on the Dots roadmap page. It's under development. And that's basically all that they've said about that official solution so far. So actually, yeah, I'll pull up the link to it. But I know Luke, who I see who is in the chat. Yeah, he's kicked off an awesome blog post, basically kind of detailing all the animation options that are currently available.
Didn't someone exactly make a forum post where it's like the compilation of all the different options, like from Mechanim to all the like asset store packages like Luca, I can't remember the name.
Oh yeah.
And like Dreaming Lasios has made one, and like there's a bunch of community makers, people that have made their own version.
All right, I got the link right here. I'll go ahead and post this into the chat. Animation option. Say Dots animation options. Once again, shout out to Luke in the chat for putting that all together. It's a very helpful thing. I reference it all the time. I always get comments from people on the YouTube channel asking about Dots animations, and I send them that, and they're like, oh, there's actually a whole lot of options available.
Yeah. And also, we also have the official roadmap for, animation stuff is listed in there, and like, this is the roadmap. This is all we can say.
Definitely very excited to see what Unity has to offer for that. As far as animation systems go, have you kind of used any in particular, or like what do you kind of typically do if you're implementing animations?
Generally, I tend to like switch a little depending on what I'm doing. My main approach is I use Mechanim, and then I on my baker I store the actual game object that I want to spawn. That my Mechanim goes and then on initialization of that in runtime, I just go ahead and instantiate that game object. But it also means that because I am in my entities world doing that instantiation, I can also get that reference on the entity itself, and I can kind of hook up all my animations directly to my entity. So if I want to play an animation, I can just say set trigger or something on my.
Right. So yeah, basically just to kind of confirm what you're saying is you have your entity and then you have like a baker with a game object field on there. Now you're not, during the baking process, you're not converting that game object to an entity. You're just saving that game object reference. And you put a prefab in there, right? Like a prefab game object.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then at runtime, basically you'll instantiate that prefab, and then basically you can now have a reference to that through a managed data component, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You can even actually add managed components are both all iComponent data that are of class, but it's also all Unity engine objects. So that also includes animation directly. So you can just actually add the animator. So if you on your game object have an animator component on that game object, the prefab that you made, and you then just go ahead and add that animator to the entity, your actual entity, your baked entity. That means that now I can just say entity manager.get components, get component object, something I can't remember the actual method for getting a managed object, but that actually gets you directly to the animator, and that means you can now directly.
Gotcha. So you just do add component object just on the animator, so that's all you really have a reference to?
Yeah.
Interesting. That's cool. That's an interesting approach. I know we were kind of talking before, and it sounded like you were using a similar approach to. You're using that kind of similar approach when you use UI with ECS. So maybe we can kind of get into that later if there's any questions on UI. Any thoughts on Cesium 3D world tiles? Speaking of kind of breaking up, larger worlds into kind of different chunks. Do you have much experience or any familiarity with the Cesium 3D world tiles?
I don't actually know.
I was a part of a project that used these. It was an Unreal project, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Cesium 3D world tiles, it basically does kind of like, I guess it takes data from a bunch of sources. I'm not entirely sure how they get it, but it's a lot of like kind of satellite imagery, street images and things like that. And it can basically generate 3D meshes of like everywhere on the entire world, basically.
Oh.
So yeah, you can like basically like spawn in like a, 1-to-1 model of New York City, and you can just kind of, play around in a game like that. And I know you can now integrate it, with Unity and everything. So you can just, drop a regular, Unity character controller in there, and now you're just like running around your 3D, New York City.
Oh, that's fun.
So yeah, it is cool stuff. All right, moving on. AI navigation for entities. I know that is one thing. If we're looking at the Dots roadmap, it's not currently under development, but it's in the kind of like under consideration category. Is that right?
Yeah, that feels right. Yeah, under consideration, it's under there.
Yeah. So it's not quite in development, but it is something that they're considering. I know for me personally, I think the one that I would recommend is I did a video on it a couple weeks ago, which is the Agents Navigation package, which is available on the Unity Asset Store. I
think he used to be a Unity employee as well.
I've heard. Yeah. No, I had a really great experience using that. It like really just feels like it is kind of like a native Unity package, to be honest. Like, it just works really well. You can, it fits in with the, existing navigation package. It works great with GameObjects and entities. So I was really happy with that one. So
that is really cool. And obviously there's also the classic approach of like going with an anime, like having a ghost game object once again, and then using the classic game object situation. Or there's also like a, what's it called? A navigation mesh query. We have a native API. It's very manual.
Oh yeah. Yeah, NavMesh query or something.
Exactly.
I tried to do that one for a while, and it was just like I was not getting very far on it.
It's a very manual process, but it is
very,
one that is probably supported by us. I would definitely recommend, like, for ease of use, just to get really good at that ghost approach, because that's like a common theme. Like, how do you want animation to work? Well, you gotta have some syncing.
Yeah.
And you want UI to work, you have something.
Yeah. Or even, feel free to go ahead and try and take a stab at implementing your own navigation and pathfinding algorithms, because, with the performance of the job system, burst compiler, and all that, you definitely can get some pretty good results from it. And maybe, doing something manually could be, a good exercise, and you could also get something, really high performant and specific to your needs. So that definitely is an option as well.
And maybe one can just try to implement, like if they don't feel like generating the entire NavMesh themselves, they can make a simplified thing on top of the NavMesh query, or they can take what's the one we call? We actually underneath use a public one. It's like a very, like, if you search NavMesh, there's a high chance that you will find a C++ thing that is a generator of NavMeshes and
interesting.
It's
just like an open source repository, basically.
Exactly.
Cool.
And similarly, you could, because of Burst, also just try to implement that.
Yeah. Good point.
Because Burst is directly able to call native C functions. No fit plus.
Nice. All right. Let's see. What would be the optimal way to create an input system for getting user input? I was thinking on implementing a singleton, but I also think a system with data in it works. Funny that you asked that. I think I actually have a video in the works that I hopefully should be ready next week, where I'm showing you kind of my approach to doing using the new input system to basically gather user input from the player. So actually the way that I do it is you can just use a regular system base, and because if you're with the new input system, there's that checkbox where you can like generate the C# class file from it. Basically the way that you use that is to just inside whatever mono behavior or system base class, you just create a new instance of that input class, and then you can basically access all the event functions, read any of the values through there. So again, I'm going to be doing kind of a more specific tutorial on this, my approach to it later on, but that's how you can kind of get that raw data. And then typically what I'll end up doing is I'll write that data to a data component. So I'll just kind of have one class that one system base that basically gets all that input data. It writes it to typically like a singleton component. And then I can have, any number of systems after that read the current input data from that frame.
Yeah, no, that is like totally like the classic default nice approach as well, because that also means that you can like test it for multiplayer use later, because usually you want to like sync the input properly and like have it do the prediction, and it becomes really hard if you haven't first like separated out the actual like logic of that player from the input itself that you got. But if you just have like the input data, then you can actually sync it up. If you also, there is one note, recently, I think it's fairly recently, they changed it around so you can actually use the old input systems with, the strings where you do input.getAccess.
Yeah.
That's like a fully burstable
thing. Interesting.
Actually, I think it's still main thread only, so you do have to like...
Yeah, which makes sense,
but you can,
Interesting. That's good to know. Yeah, so I've kind of more recently started using the new input system by default, and it's just been really great. I don't want to go back.
Yeah, I'm a, generally I'm a big fan of the new input system. The biggest
I
problem
do
with it
agree
is
that
a
it
lot of
is like,
time that you have to set up a lot of stuff.
yeah, no, I was just going to
So,
say, I do agree that it is so easy for, again, most of the kind of earlier tutorial videos I was making on dots and stuff, it was just like, nothing's happening, and then you press the space bar, and then it spawns a bunch of things. Of course, it's super nice for you to just say, if input dot space bar, do whatever, right?
yeah, exactly. But actually, something that is sadly a little hidden, but the input system does actually include a default player. So you can actually type in, I think it's like new default player, and then do the classic like enable and so on. And then it comes built in with all the look and so on, and you don't have to create an asset first and then generates these snapshots.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they have that default version of it that it has like a built-in fire action and a built-in look and move.
Well, there we go.
So,
All right. Let's see. Oh, and then I guess this guy expands on it. My use case would be that the user clicks, you select an entity, user moves the mouse around with the button pressed, and I display direction indicator, button release, and I apply an impulse to the entity. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like pretty much just kind of, like what we were saying, you can just kind of, read in that input in that one system. And then once you have all the data for that frame, you can reference that from, any number of systems to kind of, figure out where you are in your kind of, input state or what have you. Is that about right?
It's very much a pattern of like one thing writes, many thing reads from it.
All right. Well, here's a heavy hitting question. What is even Unity Dots? What is its purpose? Why should we use it?
That's a fun one.
Yeah.
Yeah, like why should we care? Well, I actually think there's two bits to it. There's obviously the common talked about one, which is performance. Like getting everything into something that is like totally cache local. You hit the CPU cache as often as possible. GameObjects are often structured in a way that is bad for that case because an update loop is hit randomly. You don't really know which GameObject update first, and so a lot of the time it will just randomly walk around memory. So generally, we say performance is like a big part of it. Why you should care, especially like if you have some simulation going on, you're making a game with a bunch of cars moving around, so all those cars should be simulated and going to their own place. Then there's also the fact that things are generally in ECS also more composable. There's, it's not so much that a game object is actually even object-oriented, if you think about it, because a game object obviously is composed of components.
Yeah, it's a component object type pattern.
Exactly. But people still tend to end up having components that end up being their own objects.
Right. Yeah.
Like a player component that end up managing the entire player, instead of just having had something like a movement component that moves around the player and then a separate shooting component that lets the player shoot. Whereas in ECS, it's more of a separation of like authoring and runtime. You declare a bunch of information like this thing has the ability to shoot, this thing has the ability to walk around, it has the ability to get input with this setup, but all of that is declared, and there is nothing that actually tells it to move around. And the nice thing about that is that you as a designer can go in and set up your entire game and just think of it as like, theoretically this works, and it also at this point is only composable. It's you made it up, and then you go in and you make systems, and those systems start acting on that behavior. They start saying, well, everything that is movable, maybe it should also take a dependency on the input stuff, and then we make the thing move. And everything that is shootable, let's shoot where it targets.
No, I totally agree. I think that's one of my kind of like favorite parts about dots, or even just like kind of data oriented design in general, is just how modular everything is. There's kind of that having that separation of your data from your game logic, it definitely just allows, it's like a much better structure, for programs, in my opinion. Because you can easily just kind of, add and remove behaviors just by, adding and removing components. You can even switch out different behaviors by, disabling certain systems and re-enabling certain ones. And so I think it just leads to, code that's, it's not subject to, fall apart if you just change one thing. You can, that it's baked into the design pattern for, being able to switch things in and out. So yeah, I think it's really great.
Yeah, and it also just like kind of discourages inheritance in some way, like the bad parts of inheritance, which generally are related to behavior. So like the good thing often when we talk about inheritance is also, I make a dwarf. It would be nice not having to recreate that dwarf setup. And so like from a offering perspective, there's nothing wrong with inheritance. Like,
right.
It is okay to declare. It would be annoying to having to declare all that information again. But from like a behavioral point of view, it is really hard to get that right. Like setting up an attack that is correct for all of them can quickly become like, well, when I call attack on an enemy, does it then call this version of dwarf or this or
yeah.
But if you have this, system component separation, then
no, it's like what they say, composition over inheritance. So you can say, if everything, needs to be some type of goblin, we can just give them the, base goblin data component. And, if some of them need to share some of the same attacks, they can have kind of those same components. And if some need to have unique ones, we can add unique ones to those. So it's definitely like really good. And yeah, by the way, if you do want any kind of more thoughts about, what exactly is Unity Dots, going into kind of the minutia of all the packages and everything like that, I did just put up a video last week. It's like a 30-minute video, just kind of going into, not going like into super detail, but just giving like a pretty, high-level overview about, all the packages, why I think they're important, and where you can use them in an ECS base and even just a regular game object based project. So I would highly recommend checking that out.
Yeah. Like the basic overview is just there's dots, which is a set of packages, and then underneath there is a bunch of like mathematics, specific mathematics package, a specific collection package for storing your data and knowing about that data, and some burst that makes your code very fast, and then you build entities on top, and a bunch of packages kind of derive from there. That's all dots is that whole ecosystem. But you can therefore also still use part of that ecosystem in a game object world, because like burst is underneath. So you can say, I only want burst, and then you can get that in your project.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So moving on, and we have a bunch of questions I see here, so we can kind of maybe go through some of these a little quicker if we don't need to spend a ton of time on all of them. But yeah, I definitely like going into detail on these. Anyhow, any thoughts about loading and saving entities / world? So do you kind of have any approach that you like to take for just kind of saving and loading entities and data and all that?
Actually, generally, no. Also, I generally don't end up working with serialization a lot, because that used to be a different team.
Right.
But the basic gist is there's the content management system, I think it's called now. And since all entities and components are just already, laid out for a serializable format, there is the ability to just serialize that directly to disk and then load it back up. Same goes for worlds. That's also how streaming works, is that, streaming streams into a streaming world, and then it copies that. When everything is done streaming in, it copies that over to the actual. Right.
Yeah, it's kind of like a staging world almost.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I know there is a good forum post. I don't probably have a link to that. You can get that easily, but I know if you kind of search around for saving and loading options, it does kind of mention that like you were saying about just taking the world and basically serializing that whole world and being able to load that later. So that is an option. I know there are kind of some drawbacks with that particular set up. But I know that forum thread did mention kind of some other options of what people took to their kind of approaches. Unfortunately, I don't have any good approaches because, again, it's not something that I have really had much of the need to do myself lately, but I know that it is something obviously like super, super important to game development in general. So it is something that I kind of would like to do a little bit more, kind of research and exploration to kind of figure out, again, some different options for those types of things.
And I also know there's this guy called Turtle who's quite active on the forums. And
yeah. I think he might be in that thread. Yeah.
Package that I definitely recommend people try and look at and tear apart.
Okay, cool. So he has his own. It's like a GitHub package or something like that.
Yeah, I can see if I can find it.
Cool. Yeah, and I probably won't let you post links, so you can just DM me if you find any links, and I can paste them in the chat. But yeah, while you look that up, I guess we can kind of start talking about any thoughts about dots physics for 2D. So yeah, so yeah, of course, right now dots doesn't have any built-in 2D physics or really any kind of like 2D tools in general. But it doesn't mean that you can't use like the existing 3D tool sets and just kind of lock it to one axis and be able to access everything that you need to for things like that. I know for like rendering 2D, I know there is kind of another GitHub library called NSprites, one that I've heard good things about, but haven't had the chance to use myself, unfortunately. But like in my Vampire Survivors game that I recently did, that I have a video up on the channel about, that one basically just uses all 3D physics, and I'm just for the meshes I'm just using just like a regular quad, and it's just rendering a sprite to it. So yeah, again, it's basically just it's technically a 3D workflow, but I'm just kind of locking it to that one axis. And then we do have the link here, which I'll go ahead and copy. So again, this is the saving and loading asset by Mr. Turtle. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Anything else on 2D physics or kind of 2D?
No,
in general?
that is pretty much the case I take as well. Like I've heard good things about Insprite, and there's also the fact that for the most part you can get quads working quite nicely, and then have URP set up. Like just use the normal 3D workflow, but with an orthographic camera.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the funny things that I noticed during my Vampire Survivors game jam. When I set the camera to orthographic mode, it said that I couldn't use forward plus rendering with orthographic mode at that time, but it's fortunately been fixed now, so that compatibility is no longer an issue. But that was just like a funny thing, because it was like, I have to use forward plus for rendering entities, but I can't use forward plus with the orthographic renderer. So
yeah. I know do you know the game called Enter the Gungeon?
Yeah.
Yeah, have you ever seen like the kind of setup they have for how their worlds are actually rendered?
I don't know.
Because like this is the setup. So like this is how the game normally looks.
Yeah.
This is actually how the scene looks.
Oh,
like
wow!
Lying on the ground. Yeah.
That's really funny. It looks cool though. Okay, so let's see. Do you know if there will be a fix for the random Unity physics bump? I'm not exactly sure if this is what he's referring to, but I know there was one time that I think like what I did is I used like Pro Builder to create like a big plane one time, and the plane had a bunch of subdivisions in it, and then if I tried to like roll a ball across it, at each of the subdivisions, like it would bump. And I kind of posted on the forums about that, and someone actually pointed me to like some things in the Unity documentation about why that actually happens, and it's just because of like the way that the physics system is set up. because it uses I can't remember the word right now, but it's like do you know what I'm talking about how like the physics system is set up, how it like gosh, I it's been a long time since I've looked at it, but how it could,
Okay,
like,
so you're generating with ProBuilder a terrain, and then you're bumping a parts of it.
yeah. That's what happened to me. I'm not sure if this is what the Bill was referring to here, but
I'm trying to find the question.
it's a little bit up from Bill Frank. But yeah, anyhow, basically the way that the physics system works is, because I think it basically moves. It doesn't just like the physics objects aren't just like here one frame and then here the next frame. Like it'll actually check between to see if there were any collisions, and then basically it doing that, if you're going fast enough, I think it would like think that it collided on that subdivision, and that's why you get that kind of bounce.
Yeah, that sounds very likely.
Yeah.
I think there is some looking into trying to stabilize part of it, but it's like on a per object basis, and then it's also more expensive, obviously, because
And then how about like physics for Android devices? I know that's kind of been an issue that I think some people have been noticing, that when you start ramping up the number of physics objects on mobile and Android based VR headsets, that you end up getting like really poor performance, and I think it is kind of like a known issue. So do you have any kind of knowledge on what's going on with that, if that's still even a thing? Or
I actually don't know. I suspect they're probably looking into it, but no, I haven't heard enough screams from the other side of the window.
Fair enough. And I don't think you actually mentioned, like, what are you doing on Dots right now? What is exactly your kind of role? Like, what things are you looking into?
Well, for a while, performance. Like, source generators are quite cool and amazing and all of that jazz, but they also like a double-edged sword, because on one hand it's like you get a somewhat nice user experience. You don't have to type as much. You don't have to do all of this annoying syntax manually. On the other hand, we have to, like, our generators have to look through all that code. It has to check that it is actually of a specific syntax, and like generate some new code based on that, and walk an entire syntax tree, and like there's a lot to this process, and so it also means that the code is quite slow. So you get like long iteration times. You make a change in your code, and it takes a while to recompile, especially on like lower end devices that works with the editor. And so we did this entire like iteration time profile session, and like looked into like different projects. Where I also looked into your project. You were a nice autograph. The pizza project.
Yep.
So yeah, we have some strategies that we're fleshing out for that.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's definitely an important thing. You definitely want to kind of improve the time, or I guess decrease the compilation time, and just being able to get out of people's way as much as you can, right?
Yep.
All right, moving on. One thing I asked myself is how render performance of entities graphics is compared to rendering with instance indirect / GPU index or instancer. Do you have any kind of
question? I feel like my question stopped somewhere. Oh, there. No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I need.
You got it.
Yeah.
So yeah, as far as like render performance goes, do you have any kind of knowledge about the difference of rendering entities graphics versus anything else?
Well, they should be the same, because that's the system that the entities use. I mean, the biggest difference is just that it's by default the one that entities uses. And so you have to think about it a lot more when it comes to entities, normal rendering. And in entities, you just get it out of the box, and we have a scriptable batcher. I can remember the batch renderer. And so we can actually take entire chunks of memory that is somewhat already stored the correct way, and then that's what we display it. So by default, entities will have a better
there you go. Performance by default.
Exactly.
My question is Netcode for entities a viable solution for MMORPG?
Yes. Yeah, but there's no question. So
yeah.
Yes.
No, I'd agree. Yeah, Netcode for entities is definitely something that I'd like to dive into very soon. I've been saying that for a while, but I just definitely it takes a lot of time to put aside learning time for myself, and then creating a sample project and making a good full feature tutorial for that. But yeah, very, very soon, I think I'll be able to start that.
Yeah.
So
it's also, the common classic joke of like, you should never make an MMORPG as your first game. Like MMOs are already bad enough, but you're also now making
a dots MMO
game where you have to like tune in all the values correctly and like, yeah.
All right, here's a good question about, brainstorm about how we might implement something. So how would you approach a finite state machine in ECS? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a fun one. Well, first things first, Philip, if you have used the character controller / rival,
yep.
called, Philip did a amazing post on finite state machines. Which I'll find first. Finite state machine, Phillips, because it's fairly common that you're using a state machine for your character controller. The classic Mario style jump that on the first time that he jumps.
You do like a extra boost and another flip, so you kind of need to have some ideas about where you are and like, the number of jumps you've performed and everything like that. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you're like taking a grappling hook approach and you're swinging across, how you're going to do that?
Wait, did you find the post?
I'm going to find this thing that he has. But in the meantime, I can also talk about something differently related to the subject, because we have something that we call like dog feeding weeks, hack weeks. It's like every quarter we will have a week to try and make like a mini game or continue working on one of our previous projects. And like for one of them, I was like, okay, I'm gonna try and make a mini version of one of my favorite games, Sly.
There you go. Yeah.
And for that, I obviously needed a finite state machine. And so the approach I end up taking is purposefully very different than the ones from Philip's suggestions. It's where instead of what's it called? You already have all of the components. Like the classic thing with a finite state machine is you have like a blackboard, and that blackboard contains all of the data that your state machine would ever need. And then depending on whichever state it is in, I'm going to use some small subset of it. Like if I am in the walking state, I should probably only change the velocity value and read the walking speed value. However, for calling that update on the walking state, it can be quite expensive. Like there's the classic approach of like having an enum that is just your state, and then you have a giant switch, and then you check that switch for that. So that's like the classic approach. I'm like, do you even need to do that giant switch case? Can we instead just store, instead of storing like an enum, what if we just store a function pointer? and so you just change whichever function pointer is in there for your update of your state. And so you make like a walk state, and that walk state implements an update, and then you just store that update into the component. Because you can validly in a component store function pointers.
Interesting. So basically, yeah, the update will get called for each of these entities. You can still kind of iterate over all the entities in a group. You're not necessarily changing the archetype of them or anything like that, but you're just kind of going through and you're just kind of calling those function pointers.
Exactly. I'm just
That's an interesting
update
approach. Yeah. You know, you still do kind of have to go to different places in memory a little bit, but you know, ideally you wouldn't be. Yeah, I mean, you know.
Yeah, because obviously you can't like properly vectorize the function pointer. Like you
Right.
can't take
Yeah.
that function. It doesn't know which function to vectorize, right? But on the other hand, you don't pay the cost of
all the massive switch.
of all the branching.
Kitty cat. All right. So yeah, I guess kind of talking a little bit more in general, do you think you know, data-oriented design, like does the finite state machine kind of lend itself well to a data-oriented design, you know, kind of like you were saying that way, or kind of like the way that Philip had mentioned? Like, do you think you know, finite state machines are okay to use with DoD, or are there, you know, better or different approaches that people should look into?
The way I see it is that they are hard to do with DoD, or like thinking about them in a data-oriented way. Because to me, data-oriented design is a lot of it is just, are you thinking about this thing in a data-oriented way?
Right.
Can I think about it in terms of the performance costs and the cache locality cost of what I'm doing, and have I set it up in the like minimally abstract approach? But when I say minimally abstract approach, not even that I would consider directly related to data-oriented design. It very much depends on where you put that line. And so there's nothing that puts finite state machine necessarily in a box of it. This isn't data-oriented. And there's also enough. What would a data-oriented designer might say that if you put this strong inheritance hierarchy in your state machine design, then you probably did something wrong. If you like overcomplicated it and made it superficially hard to understand anything about the program, then it's not data oriented. But that doesn't mean that you can't make a finite state machine that doesn't have these problems.
Sure. Sounds good to me.
That maybe mean sort of.
Yeah. No. I think that's great. Did you find that thing yet, by the way? Or are you still?
No.
I can kind of move on while you're looking for that. I think I can kind of take. I can take this. I can take this next question here. Any good dots documentation or text tutorials? I mean, definitely Unity has a lot of good resources they've put out themselves. I think the dots documentation is still pretty good. I know that you know, there are some small things missing here and there, but I think overall it's a really great introduction to, you know, what dots is and kind of, you know, how to start getting involved with some of the features. They do also have kind of a best practices guide on their Unity their Unity Learn platform, which kind of goes through a lot of the, you know, kind of higher level theory about all that stuff. So I think that's really good as well. And then Brian Will, who we mentioned earlier, he has some posts as well. He works for Unity, and so he has some kind of like official GitHub repository that has like kind of a written tutorial, which, you know, you can kind of walk through, and it also has a bunch of links to kind of more theory stuff on some of those things. So yeah, those are all definitely good options as well. Any other written tutorials or good text resources that you are aware of that are out there?
No, I think you pretty much listed all of them. Like,
well, those are the Unity ones. I know there are definitely some other kind of blog posts and other written tutorials that you can find with a little bit of Googling.
Especially like the best practices guide is a good one also, just to keep
revisiting,
because there's some stuff in there that you can't remember, but it's good to like pull up. Oh, I should probably not use this thing in this way.
No, I've definitely gone back to it a couple times for sure. So. All right, what about animation system with dots? We talked about that a little bit earlier. The long and the short of it is that Unity is working on their own animation system, and that's about all that they've said so far. I did put a link inside the chats about some other options that are available to you. Obvious question, of course, any idea when the animation system will be supported? I think I just answered that question. Yeah, I know it's definitely one that people are eager for, but luckily there are a bunch of available options, and yeah, probably going to start diving into some of those a little bit more on my channel, just to kind of spread the word a little bit more about some of the options that are available. Question, I can't see aspects in editor tab, but I see systems under relationship tab. Am I missing something? So do you know if that's kind of a editor bug? To be honest, I haven't really been using aspects really too much myself, and I usually just don't I don't really have the need most of the time to view aspects in the editor tab. Do you know anything about why that might be at all? I guess I would just say make sure that you're on the latest versions of everything. Latest version of Unity 2022 LTS, latest version of the entities packages, everything like that.
Yeah. Also, like aspects, generally you can only find them if you have like an entity pressed, and then you go in your inspector, and there's, I think, a tab beside your component saying aspects on it, and it does like a match of if any aspects match that entity.
Right. I did actually skip a question here. Trying to port Wolfenstein 3D to dots with a whole lot of SS. I got bored of zombies. Nice. Have you kind of done any porting of any maybe like older games? Try to recreate them with a dots ECS mindset or anything like that?
Well, I obviously tried to do some Sly stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I think porting games or like making like old games with like, Unity or something like that is just like a really great way to learn game development in general. That was something that like really helped me kind of early on, like in college. That was kind of one of the exercises that our teachers had us do, is like, just like, recreate some, classic game using Unity. And so, yeah, I'd say just, if there's any particular games that you might find or might think that they kind of lend themselves well to, an ECS-based approach, try and recreate it. Like, I think maybe something like Bloons Tower Defense would be like an awesome, good way to kind of get started with something, because you have, all these balloons going across the screen, and you need to kind of like, figure out how you're going to set up all the towers and how they, kind of have all these timers and interact with each other and everything like that. So, yeah. And actually, speaking of that, do you have any, if you're kind of like making a game with like a whole bunch of entities, do you kind of have approaches to, like doing things that, I guess like if a bunch of different entities kind of all have their own timers, do you kind of have, approaches for, how you kind of set up all those timers?
Well, generally, my default timing approach is always to have two values, and one of them is my value that I'm resetting to, and the other one is my like
you're
taking this value down to 0, and as soon as
exactly.
It hits 0, then it's at its end of a time, I might reset that up to.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's pretty much what I do by default. I guess if you want to save on memory costs, another approach that you could kind of take is like, maybe like kind of store like a target time, and then you can kind of compare that target time with the, time of the application. Starts getting into a little bit more complexity, but I think, yeah, when you're starting out, doing timers, then, something like, just like you're mentioning, have the two values, kind of your maximum value that you're resetting to, and then your current timer value, which is ticking up or down depending on what you want to do.
And it also kind of depends on situation. Like for instance, if I'm gonna move 5 zombies over every 10 seconds, then it might make sense to just have one component that I'm taking down, and then I'm doing that at the start of the frame, so that everything reading it knows that, oh, it's gonna be like a negative value at some point, or like 0 or a negative value at some point, for at least one frame, because it's only the next time around that something will actually go in and bump it up to the whole value, and so for that one frame, all of the other all of the zombies can then read and see, oh, I am now validly able to move one step forward. So like that can definitely like help your memory cost while not, creating a giant sync point.
Yeah, totally. All right, moving along. Got another question about animations for ECS. We mentioned that a couple times, so we can kind of move on from there. Luke mentions there's an asset called Terrain to Mesh that works pretty well. Have you used that at all by chance?
I have not, no.
No, I don't even think I've heard of that one. I will go ahead and bookmark that for later.
I guess it does what it says on the tin. It turns a terrain asset from Unity into a...
Okay, I think I've actually came across this on the asset store before. I recognize that page there. I guess I'll just go ahead and post this in the chat if anyone wants this. Terrain to Mesh. Okay. All right. Any luck on finding that forum post, by the way?
I found all of Phil's A's content, but there's more than I imagined.
All right. Well, yeah. He posts a lot. No worries if you can't find it right now. I guess you can post it in the Discord later if you come by it or something like that. Let's see. Following Turbo's Game of Life project, I'm wondering if there's a way to overcome complex relationships. I mean, if we have linear collections, we can iterate through entities fast. Let's say we access through columns, but as soon as we get to access rows, it gets much slower. Yeah, this was definitely one problem that I noticed with my Game of Life, because, again, basically the way that I spawned all the entities was just, linearly. So, which is fine if like the entity count's pretty low, because, most likely entities are going to be, looking at other entities within the same chunk. But then when you stretch it out, and then it's only like, in one row is like basically your whole chunk of entities, most of the time you're going to be getting cache misses. So yeah, I mean, there is one thing that is one thing that I really wanted to do with that project, is like implementing something like, I believe it's called like a Hilbert curve, where basically instead of just kind of spawning all the entities like linearly, you kind of spawn them in this like kind of like curved pattern, right?
Yeah.
So it's most of the time you're going to have like good data locality about, entities within the same chunk are going to be all next to each other. Let me see if I can kind of pull up.
It kind of reminds me of how when you like allocate graphics, like you're making a native version of like a Vulkan rendering library or something. They actually have the ability to specify what is the actual storage pattern of this texture, and you specify whether it should this texture just be linearly stored like this classic texture approach, or should it actually be that the first is like one tile, and then I'm storing the next tile, and then so that my general, and that's the one that I think they call optimized in Vulkan, because it is just how the graphic cards kind of expects tiles to be stored.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts on complex entity relationships?
No, I mean, a lot of complex relationships end up just being like, you have to kind of store them already prepared for that relationship to happen. Because
just kind of like thinking about the problem ahead of time and just kind of like figure out what your data is and all that.
Thinking about it ahead of time, or at least being able to like switch out that layout. So you might already in your accessing pattern, like you made the thing first work and do the thing, but you can see that you're accessing this in a very dumb throw away. And so now I'm like, okay, I can see, I'm gonna extract some data. How am I normally going through this pattern? And then can I maybe try to allocate it first in that pattern? Which is, as you said, that the Herbert's curve is a great example of something where you're like, well, I can just kind of already accelerate it for that case. It also reminds me a lot of this discussion we sometimes have at work, where it's like, not everyone can optimize for being the most optimized version of themselves. Like if rendering says I need to live in this place in memory, and so for me to be optimal, then I have to be here. Then it can't, say that that whole entity then should also be there, because that means that what is physics now going to do? Well, physics is also going to say, well, for me to be optimal, I need to be here, and then what you end up with is a lot of like separated out matrices where every entity lives on their own just because they say that I need to be the most optimal version for myself. And so
how poetic.
The only way to really help with that is like say, okay, we need to either find some happy medium that is like the most common relationship that they can all get a benefit from, or we separate it out entirely and say, well, we store the physics allocation somewhere else, or we store the rendering allocation somewhere else, and then it gets to pick that, and then you have a reference that.
Right. It's like optimized for the most common case or the most kind of performance intensive case, and then kind of everything else is, that's okay if it's kind of a secondary and maybe a little bit less efficient, because it's maybe not happening as frequently, or when it does happen, it's not as costly.
Yeah. And again, it is so hard because you like everyone wants to be that system that gets to optimize for themselves, but if everyone does it, then no one gets to do it.
All right. Someone asked, what are we brainstorming about? Basically, we're just kind of brainstorming. Like if any of you in chat have any, ideas about how to, implement some particular system or some particular game mechanic in Unity, Dots, and ECS, or like a data-oriented approach to it, feel free to let us know, and we'd be happy to kind of, brainstorm some ideas. But yeah, mostly just kind of like answering your questions, hanging out, having a good time. Hope you've all been enjoying the stream so far. Yeah, make sure you hit that like button, by the way. Felt like a good spot to slip that in right there.
Very YouTuber style. Classic, yeah.
Exactly. Okay. In the Mega City demo, the way we're using audio is by using an audio pool on the mono side. Same solution that I use. However, it's cumbersome. Any plans for a dot-specific audio solution? So yeah, I know that was something kind of early on that Unity mentioned that they wanted to really improve with dots as like some, really, hardcore and great audio solution. And I think as of right now, it's kind of one of those things that's maybe a little bit on the back burner. If we look at the roadmap, it's kind of one of those things that's in the under consideration category, right?
Yes, exactly. It is under consideration.
Yeah, so it's something that's not entirely off the table, but it's not something that's actively in development right now. So what do you kind of do for or like what's kind of your recommended approach for audio?
Generally, I like using what's it called, play one shot audio style setups. There's this ability to like play off audio as long as you have the audio clip, and you can validly store audio clips in like a Baker can just store an audio clip.
Right. Yeah. Just managed component again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it's you still have to use, I think it's like audio source dot play one shot and then pass in that audio clip, but that's completely valid.
Nice. Yeah. No, that approach seems to work well for me. And, again, most of the time I'm not doing things with like literally thousands of audio sources playing at once. But
that's the sad bit. For instance, if you want to use the audio mixer, you do still have to like actually hook it up to an audio component source. I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
But actually plays the audio clip.
All right. You'll know the answer to this one. What is the proper sort key for iJob entity? With entities.forEach, we used entity index in query, but with iJob entity, I keep hearing rumors about chunk index in query. Which one and when? Great question.
Yes, the answer is always chunk index in query.
Chunk index in query?
Yes. Like, it's even to the point where we should have a warning whenever you do entity index in query, because what entity index in query actually does is it creates a job to run before your iJob entity or your entities for each. It's the same in both cases, by the way. It runs the job before, and then it like batches up and does all the counting for that query, seeing what are all my offsets, and then stores that in a native array, and then that is then used to calculate the actual offsets in the chunk. And so by that metric, it means that it's now, completely packed indexing you're going to get. You will always get, like, the first entity you're getting will always be entity 1, and the next entity you're getting is always 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. And so you can, accurately represent that in a native array and just put all the component data in a native array, and it's packed. Right? That's the main use case for it. But it also means that we had to run that job to begin with. And for ECB sort indexing, we don't need to do that. The sort index only requirement is to be unique per thread. And then that's the deterministic ordering it uses.
Right, and when you're basically scheduling these jobs, basically each thread is going to correspond to like one chunk. That's kind of like one block of work, right? Yeah,
it's a little better than that, but yeah. Like it's going to batch a few chunks. I think we do a few chunks at a time. So we say like. But
I guess what I'm saying is like one chunk isn't going to be split across multiple threads, yes. Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so it also means that as long as I have the chunk index, then it's also a valid sort key, because we know that within that chunk, you can validly use the same sort key in chunk index 1, and the only place that it changes across thread boundary is chunk index. And so if you were using the entity index, not the entity index in query, but the entity index in chunk, then it will, be 1, 2, 3,
it's basically 4, 5, just like 7, a random number. It's like the same as like.
It will be up to 128, right?
Yeah.
But then the next chunk comes.
It's going to be the same, is what I'm saying.
An entirely different thread, and it might still give you. It will the first time around still give you the number 1, and so you have. One thread where it was using the sort key of 1, and another thread was also using the sort key of 1.
Right.
And that is now what will cause the issue, which is why chunk indexing queries is fine, because in one it will be 0, and in another it will be 1. We always know that it's going to end up with something different per thread.
So what exactly is the purpose of having a sort key for parallel entity command buffers?
Determinism. It's when we go and play back all those commands from the entity command buffer, we can now sort them correctly, because we have to have a for every thread we have to store your commands for that thread, right?
Yeah.
And so they get validly sorted there, and then another thread gets a valid set of commands. But then I now get to play it back. And how should I play it back? Well, I need to go in and say, well, all my things with the sort index of 0, I can now validly put that at the top. And then I can put all the things with sort key 2 below it. And then I can put 3 after. Now that I actually,
but
go to
I guess is that entirely necessary if we're just doing some like very simple operation, like we're just like adding a component to a whole group of entities?
No.
So I could just pass in like 0 for the sort key in that case.
I can't remember how it's set up, but yes. That is technically true.
Sounds like I'm still going to keep using the sort key anyway. It's not a very, not
also,
a very.
It won't give you any benefits, by the way.
Yeah. All right, cool.
But if you ask if we didn't have that determinism requirements, if there could be a faster builder, then yes, there could have been.
All right, here's a silly question next. When will Unity only run on ECS? When this happens, then Unreal will no longer be needed. No and no.
Well.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. Unity is not only going to run on ECS. Isn't something that they're kind of striving towards. I know that they do definitely want to, bring some of the performance benefits of ECS to, game object type features, and it just be kind of like available to you on the back end, like without even knowing. So I think that would be great. But yeah, even, if that was the case and Unity has objectively the best performance ever, there's definitely still going to be a time and a place for Unreal.
GameObjects is just the usability of them. You can almost think of GameObjects in a like a mono behavior. You can think of as like a component end system in one.
Right. Yeah.
And so from a usability point of view, they can be quite nice in that regard. And that is not something that Entities is trying to steer down on. So yeah, I mean, when will we see more of the benefits of Entities? We'll see. But it's definitely not going to take over GameObjects. GameObjects are still there.
Absolutely. Have you already tested using C++ or assembly language in the code that runs with ECS? I think that would be the peak performance. Well, isn't that kind of the point of the burst compilers, to essentially like take your managed C# code and basically write it into essentially assembly language?
That is yeah, that's exactly what it does. Well, it turns your IL code into LLVM IR, which is an intermediate representation that a compiler called LLVM can then use to properly vectorize, and like it's a highly researched thing. It is, by the way, also very slow, which is why burst is slow. So there is that, but it also means that it actually does compile down to assembly code. And so for everything that you can burst, you get the performance of assembly. And another nice added benefit is it can directly call anything from C++ or C without having to do any nasty,
just like you were saying,
interrupt. So if you were to handwrite any assembly that you think you might be able to write better, which chances are you won't. At least
whoa! think you're insulting some people in my audience there. I don't think you know how smart some of these guys are.
Specifically, our own engineers here. I've seen cases where we have intrinsic functions, and then you go and remove those intrinsic functions and just do it the simpler way, and there is no performance difference whatsoever. Like, we are not infallible either, but especially since we all want performance here. But it's just so funny that it's like you could have written it in the natural way, and then it might have turned out to have the same performance as if you had written it in something close to assembly.
Yeah.
But with burst you can also get to call something that was written and exposed as a native C function. So you write assembly, expose it as a C function, and then call it from burst, and that's fine.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. No, one of the cool things about the burst compiler is there's actually a burst inspector. So you can like open up a window and you can see what all the, intermediate language code and all that LLVM and all the way down to the assembly. You can actually like inspect that code, see what it's generating, and then maybe if you think there is a better way that you could do it yourself, you could kind of compare that as well. Do you do anything crazy with the burst compiler ever? I know like most of the time, personally, what I do is just put the burst compile attribute above it. But I know there's like a lot of like really crazy like compiler hints that you can do, and like you can go pretty in depth with it.
Yeah.
Do you use much of those
I mean,
features?
there's a bunch of good ones in there. Like, so obviously, I just mentioned intrinsics. And there are cases where that actually does have a benefit. I will definitely recommend some of the Unite talks that Andreas Fredriksson have done on burst intrinsics specifically for that. Then there's also, I remember we once added a prefetch. There's a burst. There's some burst hints where you like write burst hint and then
Yeah, it's for like
likely
branching
means that
paths, right?
what?
It's for like branching paths, right? Like if
Yeah,
you
exactly.
say
You
like
can
this
say
is like
this
the
is
most
likely gonna happen,
common.
and
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And this is unlikely to happen. And you can also say prefetch, and prefetch will then try to do a prefetch of that. Like it will ensure that the next time around this is already in cache. And we had like a 10-20% speed boost in chunk iteration. I think it was we used it for for idiomatic reach system API query.
Nice. Yeah, because I know, yeah, that's one of the things with the burst compiler is like if you have a lot of kind of branching paths, you might not end up getting the full benefits of the burst compiler because, you know, when it tries to group a lot of those operations together, but if you have branching paths, then you can't necessarily group, you know, a bunch of operations together that are like all within a loop or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because rather than actually like going through the loop and like iterating one instruction at a time, what it does is it like takes 4 of those loop operations, combines those all into one CPU instruction and runs that.
Yes.
But if you have a branch there, then you can't necessarily do that because sometimes it will run, sometimes it won't. So, burst.
Yeah, exactly.
Unity physics question here. Anytime read-only Raycast or overlap AABB is used, is it required to put in the fixed step simulation system group and update before physics system group for both the system and job?
That was a weird question.
That was from Luke. Yeah, so is it required for read-only Raycasts and overlap AABB to put it within the fixed step simulation system group, updating before the physics system group? Yeah, I think for physics jobs, the documentation tells you to put it into some specific place. I think it's within the physics system group, like after the physics initialization and before something else. There's like a specific point where it says to like put that in. Do you know what that is?
I don't, but I also generally what I use for good physics examples, like they have some good physics samples themselves. If you go to the official component samples and find the ones for physics, but also the Philip that we mentioned earlier, who did the rival character controller, like all the rival character controller examples are really good physics samples as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I use the regular ECS physics samples to reference things quite a bit. But yeah, so good to know the character controller has some good stuff. I haven't really dove too deeply into the source on that one.
Yeah, no, I can definitely recommend it because the character control examples have some good use cases for, especially also ordering. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. All right. How would you do coroutines in Dots?
Like the concept of a coroutine or the actual coroutine?
I could say we could discuss both of those because I think both those kind of are valid questions.
I mean, the actual coroutines you can't. Like the ones that you know, the default ones would wait for X amount of seconds. You can't.
Right. Yeah.
They are managed and they are not a pattern that we generally encourage. Actually, kind of same goes for normal coroutines. But the one thing that you could do is a coroutine kind of is also just a temporary entity that you then add some component to, and then that you tick down or you do whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Way tutorial pattern, and that actually then has the same fulfillment that the coroutine would have.
Yeah, you just kind of have some data component. Again, like we were mentioning, you kind of have some maybe timer associated with it. And then, once that timer reaches 0, then it kind of does something. So, still a little bit more to set up than a coroutine, but you end up getting...
and it also very much depends on what you need a coroutine for. Like, do you need to actually store an entire entity and then destroy it? Or is it fine to just always have one available, and then now... It is surrounded by a timer, and then you just say, oh, can I set this 0 to have a time again, so it's not set to 0 anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Now it does its coroutine thing. It's just always allocated.
Cool. Yeah, Luke is agreeing with the composition over inheritance. Definitely an underrated aspect when talking about dots. Yeah, I think definitely, maybe that's a little bit of feedback you guys could do a little bit better on, is like showcasing why a data-oriented approach is not only good for performance, but a lot of the other benefits that come along with it. So yeah, I think that'd be super cool. Which is hopefully something that I'm trying to do with my channel here anyhow. Rising is based on ECS 1.0.8. No, definitely not. I'm pretty sure they're using 0.17.
No. They have a custom version of 0.17 that is...
Well, that's what I meant. Yeah. It's based off of 0.17, but they basically, decompiled all the packages and did a bunch of extra stuff on top of that. And yeah, because there was so much custom logic in there... Oh, really? Yeah, so there's just like so much custom logic in there that by the time they shipped, they weren't able to even upgrade to the 0.50 version, which was kind of another major step. And ECS 1.0 came out way after Rising was out. So they're on a much older version, but it's a custom version, and I would highly recommend see if you can find that excellent Twitch stream they did online, where they go really into detail on a lot of the cool things that they built for that game.
Yes. It was quite fun as well, because like they did a Unite presentation, and after that they were in the Copenhagen office. As we were just like one afternoon chatting like for 1 or 2 hours, just talking about ECS and all the different use cases from our team and what they liked and didn't like, and it was a great amount of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, those seem like good guys. I got a friend of mine used to work for them, so yeah, they seem really cool and very knowledgeable. See, there is an entity manager.instantiate overload that takes an instance count parameter. ECB does not have this plan. Is there a plan to add it to ECB? And maybe even just expanding off of that. Are there any plans to add kind of more, helpful functions to entity command buffers, entity managers, everything like that? Like, is that, are you still kind of you guys still working on kind of expanding the API to, basically allow people to do things easier?
I don't even know how much I can say.
Yeah, I'm not going to break any NDAs here today.
Yeah, exactly. All of the lots of people watching this going like, can you say that?
I know I've definitely created some like helper functions of my own. Like I created a like an add remove component where you could basically just like pass in an entity, the component type, and then a true or false for if you want to add or remove it, which was kind of helpful for when I'm doing kind of like toggling logic and things like that. So
yeah, exactly. And also like there's quite a few things you can already do yourself by just adding extension functions, so that it already feels like, oh, this is just part of entity manager, and oh, this is just part of entity command buffers. So like you can definitely do a lot of like I want to instantiate this thing and then set a local transform like we're probably not going to make one for specifically local transform, setting that to the right scale, but like a user very easily could just go in and say dot instantiate with scale of 2, and then it would both call the ACB and it will also call the local transform, setting it up the correct way. Just for like improving existing functionality, of course. Like we're always looking at like
what are the pain points people are having, if there are things that are people doing over and over and over again, if there are things that you hear people like rewriting helper methods for.
We see like, oh, they're doing this over and over. How can we like either help with this or like see if we can stop them from doing this? Like a common error that I see people run into a lot of the time is like they write get singleton in their code, and then they make a player build, and then they're confused. Why am I getting all these errors in my player build? And why are things not loading, and why are things not working properly? And like 90% of the time, it's just that they were using get singleton, but they were never actually they were waiting on that from a subscene, and since subscenes are loaded asynchronously, it means that it's not available from the first frame.
Yeah.
And so you did a get singleton in a update loop, and now that system will never run because it crashed the first time around. Right? It's just always wrong, and even if it's loaded in, then I think it's already invalidated by that point anyway.
Yeah.
So.
And yeah, actually, now in Writer, if you ever use system API.get singleton, you'll actually get a little bit of a warning in your iSystems, and you could basically do the alt enter on that, and it automatically puts in the require for update.
Yes, exactly.
And I was actually talking to the Writer developers, and they learned that from one of my tutorials, so they put that in there. So they they gave me credit on that one. So I was like, nice, that's sweet. So
I remember Turtle looking at that and going like, no, I know better, and then he went in and disabled it immediately, because the way he does it is that he turns on the world initially, and then like he makes sure that everything is loaded, and so get singleton would already be valid by that point, that all systems start running.
Interesting.
So that's also like another thing that like if you have an error or warning of that kind, it's actually quite nice that you can disable it for a specific file when you know something is that you like know better, or you can also set up these rule files, they're called, in Unity. If you just Google Roslyn Analyzer Unity, you will see some Unity documentation on what a rules set file is, and it's basically this file that says, could you please disable this error in this assembly, or could you please disable this for everything and so on, which can be quite handy, especially also for like we have blob asset verifiers.
Okay.
And so there are a few cases where someone is doing something very custom with blob assets, and our errors actually get in the way, and so they can actually just above and below that segment of code say #pragma warning disable. The error.
I remember I had to do that, I think in one of my tutorials a little while ago. I don't remember exactly what it was for, but yeah, I did have to do that because we were getting a warning about something. Yeah. But anyhow.
But it's kind of like the the native disabled restriction.
Right. Yeah. It's like
when you do jobs.
Stop talking. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Sweet. Okay. Does the require matching queries for update attribute go before the system, the job, or both? So that's just for the system, because that's basically just referring to when the update is called on the system, right? So that doesn't need to go above the job, correct? Require matching queries for update.
I'm getting some weird audio right now that I don't know where it's coming from.
Oh.
On my phone?
Like we were talking about earlier with the phantom audio coming through. I'm not hearing anything coming through on my headphones, so. Is it still
No, I have
going?
no idea. There was music coming from somewhere, and I have no idea why.
Oh, it's Friday night for you, so someone might be partying out in Copenhagen.
Yes, that might be the case.
So yeah, require matching queries for update attribute. That's just going on the system, right?
Require for queries for update need to be before the system, the job or both. But just before the system, yeah.
Yeah. Because yeah, it doesn't even apply to jobs, right? It's just for systems, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a well, actually, so isn't it by no? So if I remember correctly, because they changed it, so now it's systems always update all the time, no matter what, unless you put the require matching queries for update attribute, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's also some good reasons for this, because when we have our generators run, obviously they will also generate queries, and so they count as require matching queries for update. And so if you were to use an iJob entity and you scheduled it, even if that iJob entity didn't run, or you had made your own entity query that you're passing in to that iJob entity before scheduling, it would still always be the iJob entity query being a requirement for that system to run, which is a very confusing behavior. So what we tend to say to users instead is please go in your onCreate and just say state.require for update, or I guess if you're using a system-based, require for update directly. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it is a handy feature to use, though. Like if you're doing some kind of like initialization logic and you want some things to happen like within the on start running or something, I do kind of end up using it for some things, so it is helpful. Why Entities Graphics still uses color type for meshes colors instead of blittable float 4. Is it a different color type than just like the regular Unity color type, or is there some kind of like implicit conversion that happens to the float 4?
Color type for meshes colors instead of a blittable float 4. I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, sorry, couldn't answer your question. Yeah. So
I definitely know that for like Entities Graphics, one of the nice things is that they're like fully compliant. There are property overrides with shader graph, and so you can always just go in and make your own lit shader, and then you know that is also a valid what's it called? Oh, it was my watch that made the music. But yeah, that means that you can make your own material override property component, and that overrides with a float 4, which is, you know, a valid float 4, because it's a float 4. So you don't have to use a colored type for Entities Graphics. You can also use float 4 for changing colors of images.
Cool, sounds good. When will the production version of Project Tiny be available? You got a date for us? You give us a date. Come on.
I am not product, and I am not gonna take that risk.
Yeah. So So I believe it's no longer called Project Tiny. They're kind of referring it as the entity's runtime, right?
Yeah.
And again, that's another under consideration thing on the roadmap, right?
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, so it's has not been announced that they're officially developing anything on it, but again, not completely off the table.
It is only under consideration. It's only.
So yeah.
To the people curious, the roadmap is still here.
Oh, you'll have to send that to me.
I found out that I can't post a link. It just doesn't get turned into anything.
No, it's like literally not even coming through.
Oh,
it shows it on your end, but it doesn't show it on mine. I could probably like just type something in the chat. I'll give you mod permission.
I can write something in chat. There we go.
All right. There you go. See if you can post the link now.
There we go.
There you go. Okay. Moving on. Yeah, Philip's post may be in the rivals thread, the state machine one. So that might help you track it down. Concerning the collision physics bumps, are there any walkarounds? He says, I'm going to give up on my network racing game. Do you have any...
That's a good question. I mean, you can try to make your own more simplified mesh.
Because yeah, that's what I ended up doing. Is I just like basically removed all the subdivisions from the mesh. But I understand, if you're making a game where you want to go up and down and all around, then that's maybe not necessarily
but
as
that's
much
also
of an
like
option.
you can if you split it up, what's it called? Like the problem stems from when you do all of these subdivisions, and it kind of makes it like an inscribed surface, and it becomes like it gets quickly confused. But what you can do instead is if you turn it into like individual triangles, I think it's okay for it to like you can make custom colliders, is what I'm saying. You can make collision meshes yourself, and also, I think it's literally just a case of you can take an existing mesh, and the triangle buffer in that is a fine input for the blob assets that you create for a collision mesh. So you can kind of work around it that way.
Yeah, maybe not the easiest solution, but yeah, hopefully there's some better things out there, or they kind of come up with a better.
I mean, there's also the option of trying Havoc and seeing if it's more stable.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you do have to have the Pro or Enterprise license for that.
Yes.
Yeah, if you haven't already, I'd recommend maybe checking out It sounds like if you're working on a networked racing game, you maybe have already checked out the network racing sample project that Unity has put out, and just kind of seeing how they set up their meshes and everything like that. Yeah, that's kind of on their GitHub and available and all that.
And also, like a DCC tool can often quite easily do these splits for you. So you can just get it to segment it into chunks, and then you take that mesh and put it into Unity, and it should work.
Sweet. I think the experimental character controller package is now available, former known as he says it's in the rival thread. Nice. Good to know. What are the current limitations for animation in Unity Dots? Never mind, I was already answered. Fair enough. All right. What is the best way to use scriptable object with blob assets? Is this something that you kind of do at all? This was something that I was kind of like working on for a little bit. It's kind of like a nice tool to be able to easily convert scriptable objects to blob assets. Yeah. Do you have any kind of thoughts on using that at all?
No, I haven't written my own tool for that, but I have quite often just wrote a little extension function that takes my scriptable objects and turn it into a blob asset, because it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah. The one thing that you kind of run into is like, of course, blob assets, they can use kind of any managed type, scriptable objects can use pretty much any managed type. Whereas like your data components, there are kind of the more restrictions on them, and there are, some, specific Unity ECS things. So if you, maybe drag a transform into your scriptable object, do you want to actually convert that over to a local transform or something like that? So there are definitely kind of some things you need to consider. So it's not necessarily always, the easiest thing to do. But, if you're just like storing like literally just data values in these scriptable objects, then it is fairly easy to just go ahead and kind of write your own like essentially interpreter that, inside your baker, it just kind of, reads that data and then just translates it over to regular data components. So, What are the most common approaches for finite state machine equivalent in DoD? I think we kind of were already talking about that a little bit. It sounds like there is kind of that one blog post.
On our own also, because like there is a few. It's like you can either choose to have one component be your state, and then your state, then you already have all your different components on your game object, not a game object, your entity, and then it's just a matter of one ECS system might change that into a run state, and now it can do a it will do a switch statement on that. It will always find that component and look at that, and then it will do another loop, but it will do another get component of this type inside it, and then that's one pattern you can use. Another pattern you can use is, as we talked about earlier, just changing out a function pointer.
Yeah,
every time.
yeah, I think that's a interesting approach. What are you two using dots for most of the time? Other than building it, and sounds like your occasional quarterly hackathon weeks. What kinds of things do you use dots for? If you have the time.
I mean, free time projects. It generally directly fits with the kind of games and projects that I want to make. The whole thing about how I actually joined. I joined because I was very deep down and into the kind of things that we're working on.
Yeah.
And then I somehow got a job. I have it. Now it's not somehow, but I was very confused back then why that was the case. Trying to get rid of some of that imposter syndrome, and then ending up actually working on the thing that you're also actively using always is like I generally use it for when I'm making a game and I grew up with Minecraft, and Minecraft actually also is a game that now uses not our ECS, but it does use another one, which is Entity, another ECS style.
I don't even think I knew that. That's cool.
So yeah, no, I more than just work, I also use the package daily.
Nice. Yeah, and then what am I using dots for? So I do client projects with dots. I'm currently working on a project right now. Can't really say much about it other than it's not a video game, and it's like a PC VR application, and it's been working really well for what we need it for. The performance is awesome, and then outside of that, pretty much everything I'm making with dots, I'm going to be sharing on the YouTube channel. If I'm doing tutorials or more kind of bigger projects, pretty much anything that I do with that, I'm going to be sharing on the YouTube channel. I mentioned that I kind of want to get back to some multiplayer stuff and hopefully have a big full multiplayer tutorial and some kind of fun things that we can do along with that. Just kind of being this cool dots focused community. Maybe we can kind of play this game or even the Mega City multiplayer game together. I want to figure out something that we can do for that. But yeah, before I get into that, I do have one exciting project coming up that I'm looking forward to. So
Sounds exciting.
Yeah. It'll be good. We'll give you a little teaser for that. Should be out in like August or so.
Ooh.
So let's see. I'm in the process of making a NavMesh generation system using Unity.physics by using the mesh simplification and then converting to convex colliders. Any advice?
I definitely need to make sure to always have the chat box in the correct order so that I also can read the question. It is.
So yeah, for a NavMesh generation system, again using the Unity physics.
Yes. There you go. Okay.
And then converting them to convex colliders. So any advice or thoughts on doing a NavMesh generation?
I mean, generally, I think that does look like a fine approach. The difficulty often with generating a NavMesh is that it quickly becomes like, how do I make it the most optimal NavMesh for my bazillion different RTS models, and like that's also, you know, I should probably find that very popular one, because it's nice implementing your own, but if you can get by with something off the shelf, then that's probably even nicer.
Are you talking about the that kind of built-in manual one that we were looking for, the NavMesh query or whatever?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I think there was a guy on YouTube who had done a couple videos about the NavMesh query. So if you want to look into that at all, you know, maybe that could be some helpful resources for you. So yeah, once you get that link, you can go ahead and post it in. But I think we can kind of move on to the next one here. So. I have many components on an entity, so I thought about creating a secondary entity with half those components on and store a ref to it in the primary entity, then just look up the components when needed. Thoughts? So I think the first question you kind of need to ask yourself, you know, is that entirely necessary to do? And I think you can kind of start, like, you kind of really need to understand, like, you know, how many entities of that archetype are going to be, you know, basically kind of in your game. And, you know, just see, you know, once you know that, and you kind of also have to look into how many entities of that archetype fit within a single chunk, you know, to see if you actually are, you know, spanning these entities across, you know, many chunks. So I think it's going to be really important for you to kind of, you know, use some of the, you know, existing Unity windows to see, you know, whether that is, you know, actually necessary for you to kind of split those up. And if it is, then I'd say, you know, just try and split them up as best as you can so that you're not doing a lot of like cross entity referencing. So it's like, you know, if you're like on one entity, you're not like constantly looking at the other entity. Like, you know, you kind of want to group, you know, components that are going to be used together on the same entity as much as possible. But yeah, I mean, it's totally valid to have kind of, say, you know, maybe a front end type entity that has, you know, it's just kind of like basic, you know, movements components, physics components, any visual components, things like that. And then maybe, secondary entity that's just data only things, and it kind of worries about all the, you know, particular stats and everything like that. So I think that's definitely like a valid approach to that.
And also it's like that, one of the reasons that we often talk about like a separation of runtime and offering is that if you already think more of your components as like this is the kind of like feature set that the components include, then that also kind of helps answer your like, okay, well, if I am offering a movement component and I have that set up as my offer, it might look like it, you know, this game object is being offered into just one entity, and that might be fine as a first time approach. But then, you know, you go into your profiles and you see I'm actually rarely ever using my shooting system. It's only being called once, you know, a few moons when someone actually presses shoot. Then, you know, you go in and you see, well, actually, it might make sense for, like, my offering thing is still the same. Like, it still is adding this shooting component, shooting offer. But it actually went in and in our baker, it did create additional entity, and it added the shooter to that entity instead. And now, like, probably I still have to make some changes to my system code in order for it to be allowed to be a separate entity. Because the input still has to be read from the initial one.
Yeah.
But in this case now, you know, that data won't be in the same chunk because it's a separate entity, and you only do that lookup once in a few moons. And so you started with something that was as simple as possible. It was like all in line, but then you looked at a profile and you saw that one thing was off, and then you just simply went in and changed the system thing about it. So all the, like from a level designer perspective, you yourself as a level designer, when you're in that mode, you didn't have to make any changes to your game object, but you still got the benefit for that performance. And so whether you split up your components a shit ton to all these different entities, or you split all your values up separately to components, what actually ends up mattering more is like how you like chunk-rise them and like
just kind of like considering your data layout. And actually that was one of the points that I brought up in my last video about just going over like what ECS is. It's like, in general, one entity is just going to represent one thing, but that's not necessarily always the case. It could be that one entity is like part of a bigger thing. Like there are a bunch of entities that kind of are all kind of, can be considered one thing, or even the other way where one entity is kind of representative of a bunch of different things. So, it's just really cool that we have the flexibility to kind of like play around with what an entity is and kind of like, just again, figuring out the most optimal way to store and process our data. So yeah, you definitely have a lot of flexibility for that. So yeah, again, going back to the question, I just recommend, just getting some good information about, the actual stats. If you just have like, one player that has a whole bunch of components on it, and it's just, that one player, and sure, you're filling up the whole 16 kilobyte chunk with all the data that you have on it. That's no problem because there's only one of them. But, if you get to the point where you have, a bunch of different enemies with a bunch of different component types, and now you can only fit like 4 entities within a chunk, then yeah, maybe you can kind of look into splitting some things off.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. What's in store for the character controller? You have any major announcements about any plans
if
on?
you want announcements, it's definitely not me you should go to. That's,
we'll break them, you guys. Don't worry.
But no, yeah,
It's still technically considered experimental right now, right?
Is it? I mean, that might be true. We can definitely check.
That's one that I forgot to.
It changed name from Rival to.
This is the Unity character controller now.
Exactly.
Which is, it's really annoying because it's like so hard to Google Unity character controller and look for get the DOS one.
Yep. What do you mean? It's the same for physics.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just gonna say. The physics is the same. Character controller package. Yes, so it is still considered experimental. So it's 1.0.0 experimental 22. I'll go ahead and paste the documentation in the chat if anyone wants to reference that. But yeah, so it's still considered experimental at this point, but you can definitely use it. And yeah, I forgot to mention it in my video where I was going over all the Unity packages. I knew I was going to forget one. But yeah, I'll have to do another dedicated video on that one. Hopefully it's gets its fully certified release soon, but we don't have any timelines on that right now.
Good, like from a actual user experience point of view, I definitely have had good experiences with it. I know how you did that one video on Rival at some point.
Yeah. When it was still an asset on the asset store, I did. Yeah. I thought it worked well, and yeah. Okay. With lookup components that are read only, is it better to do value equals mylookup.getRef e.value.ro, or is it better to do val mylookup e, which is recommended for performance?
Yes, it's the latter.
The latter. Okay.
The latter. Yeah. So in the previous case, if you do val equals mylookup.getRefRo, that alone means that you are now doing a like a both, all the things for the lookup itself, and then you're saying, okay, I'm going to store that pointer. And then afterwards, you're saying, okay, I'm going to read what's behind that pointer.
Okay.
And then you're copying over that into a storage versus,
I see.
Doing all of the lookup and then
just doing the array lookup. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah. And that's much easier to write, and you don't have to do all this get ref RO, value RO, and any of that.
Yes, exactly. And cool. If you're, using a system, then system API.getComponent does the exact same thing.
Okay. Will there be a visual scripting solution for ECS maybe integrated into Unity visual scripting bolts? Any major announcements on that one, Dani?
I think it's one of the things that is into consideration.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I know that was something that they earlier on was something that they had kind of wanted to do, but yeah. All right. Any good books/resources for general architecture with larger ECS/data-oriented games? I can make simple games and demos pretty easily, but the scalability of it scares me. So yeah, I guess this kind of is like two questions that we could kind of go into about, just kind of general books and resources on, data-oriented architecture, and then also scaling games, because that's, absolutely an important thing of, their current slogan, which is, creating more ambitious games. Yes. So I guess, yeah, we can kind of tackle the first one. So any good, what do you have here? The rules of programming.
Book I can recommend.
The rules of programming, how to write better code. Is that a data-oriented one?
It is fairly data-oriented in many ways.
Okay.
It's not directly data-oriented, but it is reviewed by a lot of people who are data-oriented. So
it's not as data-oriented as this one. Data-oriented design. Yep. All right, I'll put it in front of your camera there.
That's a good one as well. But the nice thing about this book is you go to the first page, and then you're like, okay, who reviewed the book? And we talked about Andreas Fredriksson earlier, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, his name is right there. Okay, my camera won't focus enough, but it's like
it did for a second, and then you kind of moved your hand. There it is. Yep.
Yeah, and there's Fredriksson.
Cool. I'll have to check that one out. That'll be a new one for me.
Yeah, it's by this guy Chris Zimmerman, who is like the technical lead at Sucker Punch.
Oh, sweet.
Which is Sly and Infamous.
Oh yeah. There you go. Well, see, I was always a big Insomniac fan, and of course, the engine director for Insomniac for a long time was, of course, Mike Acton, who kicked off the data-oriented revolution over at Unity.
Yeah. And for me, my favorite kid, both as a kid and as an adult, is Sly. And now this guy has made a book that is very data-oriented.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive into that one.
I usually recommend that one as well. And like for other resources, obviously there's the famous Mike Acton talk.
Yep.
That is a quite famous one.
Yeah. I think we mentioned a bunch of the good Unity assets earlier, or Unity resources earlier in the stream. Their Unity Learn platform, all the kind of Git repositories that have good learning resources, all the documentation on there. One thing that I've kind of been diving into a little bit more is, that guy, Casey Muratori. You came across him? Yeah, he's got like some YouTube videos on his channel called Molly Rocket. And he has I think it's on like his Substack page. He posts like just other videos on there that he calls the, like performance aware programming. And so it's like a couple bucks a month, and you kind of get like all these resources each week about just kind of like, it really starts with like going into like how CPUs work and like processes instructions, and it does like a good job about like giving you kind of like hands-on things about how you can like actually get to understand these things a lot better. So I think just like kind of having that good solid foundational knowledge about like how computers actually work is like so important to data-oriented design. because like that's really what we're doing with data-oriented design. It's like we're optimizing our code for how the computer naturally stores and processes data. So
Yes.
like having that good fundamental understanding about, you know, how a computer actually works is going to lead you to make better decisions when you're writing your data-oriented code. And you just kind of like end up, you know, not doing stupid things where you end up getting, you know, poor performance and things like that. So I think that's another really great resource. Looks like there's some people in the chat in there who are also part of that course.
Agrees. I noticed all the like.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, both like Casey Moratori and like Jonathan are like have some good information. Like Jonathan Blow streams every once in a while.
Yep.
And also stream with that thing, and same goes for Casey. But also for both of them, they also happen to be quite opinionated, so you kind of have to like, take it with a grain of. There's a good write-up that Casey did called semantic compression. I can definitely also recommend that.
Oh, okay. I think I've heard of that, but I haven't actually read it.
Yeah, it's like this very short little page, just going over like you should think of your code more as like a compressor. Yeah, I think the article does a lot better of like stating it, but like, yeah, don't try to over abstract things before you've even tried it, and then on the other hand, if you think like a compressor, then once patterns start to emerge, you can start localizing that complexity.
Yeah.
And that's also one of the things that this book goes into. They have a topic called localized complexity, or generalization takes 3 examples.
Cool. Yeah, I'll definitely have to pick that one up. Doesn't seem like a too terribly long book either. So I'll show you. I recently got a recommendation for a book from a friend called .NET Memory Management for better code performance and scalability. I'm like, oh, that seems cool. Like it seems like, you know, something I can kind of brush up on my kind of, you know, C# memory management skills. So anyways, this is the book that I ended up getting. So here's the look how fat this thing is. It's over 1,000 pages, just going like so in depth on like everything probably ever possible that has to do with memory and .NET. Like there's literally like 500 pages in here just dedicated to how the garbage collector works in C#. Crazy. Wow. Crazy. So here it's a great book, but I'm a little intimidated to get into that, to be honest.
I can imagine. Like your own mental memory garbage collector will probably get
seriously
rid of some of that information before you even
seriously
about just the garbage collector alone. That
yeah.
You know, some of the examples this book gives on the back page of the rules, because it contains 21 rules. That's like the basic setup of this book, is that everything is put into like small 21 small rules in the like form of one sentence, and they sum up the entirety of that rule, and then they go into description and examples on how that rule is applied, taking examples in their own games at Sucker Punch.
Awesome.
And so there's
does it just kind of use like oh sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, does that book just kind of use like regular, just like C++ based code examples?
Yeah, it's C++, and then there's 2 appendixes. An appendix for if you're coming from JavaScript and want to understand C++, and an appendix for, I think it's Python.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they have two different languages and how to read C++ if you come from those two. But no, okay, yeah, so the examples of some of the rules are, as put on the back, is as simple as possible, but no simpler. Let your code tell its own story. Localize complexity. Generalization takes 3 examples. Work backwards from your result, not forward from your code. The first lesson of optimization is don't optimize. A good name is the best documentation. Bugs are contagious. Eliminate failure cases. code that isn't running doesn't work, sometimes you just need to hammer the nails.
I'm sold. Sounds like a great book.
Yes.
Cool. And so kind of moving on to the second part of the question. So it sounds like they can make simple games and demos pretty easily, but the scalability of it is a little bit daunting. So do you have any kind of tips about how to scale things? I know that's definitely like one thing that's, even in some of my smaller projects, I end up just getting like a ton of scripts, and it ends up just kind of being a lot to kind of manage. I think the way that I sort of did things in my Vampire Survivors project is, rather than like breaking things up as I typically do in my tutorials by like, having a folder for components and another folder for systems and mono behaviors and all that, I was kind of breaking things up by feature more. So I'd have like, here's kind of like the, player attack files. And so this would have, component systems and mono behaviors all in here, but I'd have, 5 or 6 of them within a folder. So it's like, there's good kind of organization in that sense. So that's just kind of like one thing, just as far as like overall kind of project organization goes. But just kind of talking about general overall scalability. Do you kind of have any tips about how to approach that?
I mean, the way I generally tend to approach it is very dependent on like expected project size also, and like expected amount of people working on the project. Because if it's one person, then what I usually do is I just I start writing out everything into like either 1 or 2 of X amount of C# files, and I don't even start going in and making my own component file and so on. And then at some point, feature sets emerge, like a damage system and like a shooting system or movement system, and those I can begin to structure into its own thing, and then that way you kind of localize complexity by way of feature sets instead, and that kind of makes your project more scalable, because you're not ending up in this case where you just separate things by component by so on, but you can kind of think of them as their own individual thing that you don't have to think about that often with other segments. And like all the intercommunication kind of has to happen then through like either some intermediate data representation or like you just sometimes end up having 2 features that have to live together for a while into it makes sense for them to have a intermediate.
Yeah. I think that is probably kind of one of the difficult things, when I've kind of scaled projects up, is like, we talk about the data-oriented approach of like, separating things out into their, nice kind of separate things. But, there definitely still are times where, things kind of need to be interlocked with each other, especially if maybe we're like, doing some things with UI where we have kind of like a slider that changes some like, data component values, and like that has to be all kind of hooked up. And then we kind of end up having these kind of intermediate steps. And I think that is kind of where like some of the kind of complexity comes in, is from a lot of those things.
Exactly. But then you also, like, if you have enough of those intermediate representations, then you also kind of end up having to localize that complexity over into its own. Because that is another approach you can take, is that, well, if some pattern, like the way I like to approach things is also I like to not pre-abstract things, but to at least think in a code style that ends up turning into a pattern, and like that now that I have a pattern that has actually emerged, then I can do a proper abstraction on that. I can localize the complexity. I can put it into its own package or its own concrete.
Right. So just kind of get something that works first, and then you kind of figure out what is kind of like a better pattern for it later.
Yeah, and it's also good to like get something that kind of approaches a pattern. Like it's okay for that code that you wrote to be kind of repetitive, kind of like stupid looking almost. But if that then kind of meets in the middle of some other thing that you're working on also on this side, then it and enough of those cases emerge, then you can put it into something.
Totally. That sounds good to me. With newer versions of .NET on the horizon, how well will the features found in those versions be able to work with Dot's workflow? For example, can ref fields and generic math from C# 11? So again, yeah, you probably can't comment too much on any features in progress or anything like that.
Yeah, no, but I can say there's a lot of .NET modernization going on.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something that was kind of talked about at GDC actually last year, back in 2022, and it was something that I had kind of asked about in this year at GDC, and it sounds like things are still kind of in progress. They're working towards it, and hopefully once the newer versions of .NET are fully supported in Unity, that Dots will be able to take advantage of a lot of those new features.
Exactly, and like for us, it's like we just depend on C# a lot of the time, and like burst working, but the actual code that we write is still perfectly valid C# code, and so it's not so much that will Dots work on all these new features. It's just a matter of like whenever they work.
Can you take advantage of all that? Yeah,
exactly. And they are on the like path to get away with all the tech debt of like Mono and so on. And as soon as they're on that path, then hopefully we get to soon see them get on a path of like all the new C# language features and all the new like that's what they're working on. They're trying to get back on track and then get into all the new.
No, and even in a bunch of the client projects that I've been working on recently, there's like a lot of nice features in some of the newer versions of .NET that I would be really nice to have, but unfortunately just can't because of Unity limitations. So hopefully that gets all sorted out soon, but can't imagine that that's an easy task. Not a job that I would personally like to have, to be honest. But I know the people who are working on it are very passionate about it, and I'm confident they're going to do a good job.
Yes.
Super freaking knowledgeable people.
Yes. Yeah. You can definitely also see that in the office. It's a really nice thing to see.
Yeah. All right. Is Entity Graphics comparable to Unreal's Nanite? No.
I mean, they're two very different things.
Yeah, they accomplish different things. They have different goals.
Like Nanite is a lot of triangles, whereas we are a lot of models. Especially, something went wrong with my voice there. But yeah, especially like similar meshes and like animations that overlap.
All right. Is there any possibility to make game containing both dots and GameObjects approaches? Yes, absolutely. In fact, most of the time when you are going to be using an ECS-based game, you still are going to have to be using GameObjects for things like UI, animations. I mean, there are some options where you can do ECS-based animations, but definitely still some things like particle systems, I guess, would be another one. Things that you'll still have to kind of use GameObjects for. So right now, you just won't be able to get around that. You still will have to use GameObjects for things. And yeah, definitely, you kind of have to kind of link the dots and the GameObjects worlds together. Do you have any kind of typical approaches that you like to take for linking dots and GameObjects? I know you talked about one a little bit earlier in the stream where you kind of store a reference to a prefab and then you kind of spawn that at runtime. But are there any other tips or approaches, things you like to do?
Yeah, I mean, I generally, if I can at all, use that other approach. That's the one I like the most. I just spawn it and use that. But there's also making a classic GameObject singleton, and then just use that as like a store, like have a my managed store, and then it has all the like GameObject UI on it references, and it has all the similar all the references that you would ever need to get. You can just get through that singleton, and that can be happily accessed through both a system base and even an I system can access that. that's generally the approach I take for like simple UI changes, like changing a coin value in a game, or yeah. Then there's like if I need a bazillion things synced up, then I do have to go in and add a managed component and store that reference over somehow. Even luckily those cases seems to be far and in between from my experience, at least, where you can't use that first approach that I said, because in the first approach, then if you have a 1,000 warrior people with animations on them, they will, every one of them will just instantiate their own game object, and then they have a valid managed to ECS setup already.
Sweet. Yeah.
What about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of end up doing something similar, just kind of spawning them and creating some kind of link, like, depending on what I need.
There's definitely one pattern that I try to steer away from, which is to do any modifications of the entity world from within a mono behavior.
Right. Yeah, you're kind of saying that.
So like I will never have in my update loop any world.default game object. Well, default
game object injection world.
There's, by the way, a reason that name is so long. That's because we want to scare you away from it. Because it immediately stops any chances of like you having made a multiplayer game, because it will only ever refer to the client world, and so chances are you just haven't thought of like where it is being run, and also like if you use the default injection worlds, you don't know like which entities are valid. You don't like basically you just end up a lot of the time having to re-access a lot of values.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess you could say it's almost like fire and forget, almost like you don't really have a lot of like insight into kind of what's happening, but you can just kind of say, hey, do this, and then most of the time it kind of works.
Yeah, exactly.
Until it doesn't.
It's a lot nicer for your systems to go in and look for any managed reference that it needs.
Awesome. So I guess is the kind of approach that you take in those types of situations where, when you have, say, a UI slider where you want to update some data component, you kind of end up going through some like intermediary steps for that?
Yeah, like I would probably already in my on start system running have went and found that system, that slider. I would have done either I probably wouldn't have done a GameObject.find, but I would have done something similar, like I would on my UI slider itself have made a singleton or similar, and then done that in its awake, and that means that is now valid from after it has run awake, which in an on start running of a system that is in most cases always valid, and so you can just go in your own say to get a reference to it and say, well,
then do you like listen to the like on value changed event of the slider like in that system?
No, not really. I am instead like now that I have in my system base, right, I already have a valid reference to that slider.
Right. Yeah.
And now in my own update, go and put the value on an actual component, or do the thing that actually often even before that I do the thing that that slider would have done. Like let's say the slider steers some character back and forth on the ground. I would in my own update already have done that translation setup, and then at some point if I need it for that separation to occur, then I go in and separate out and say put it on a component first, and then set the component every time. Similar to how I would do input, where I in the start it's fine to not have a specific component for your input.
Yeah.
Later on, it can be quite nice to say, well, actually, I have this first step called get input, and then that spawns a component or changes a component, and then something later on where to use that component.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I guess most of the time, when I'm doing something like a slider, like it's typically like a configuration thing. So maybe you'd go into a menu and you'd say like change the input sensitivity or something like that. And like, yeah, I mean, most of the time I'm just kind of lazy and just use the mono behavior to call the default game object injection world and just update that component directly.
Yeah.
Again, so I'm not having to read. I'm not having to read that every single frame for that slider that you just open in the menu and change.
Yeah, exactly. And that's honestly also fine, because again, if it's like the simplest thing that makes something works, then it's probably like that's good enough for the most part for now. Like, it's more of are you making the code too complex? Like that's kind of the thing that you always have to answer for yourself as a programmer is, am I making things more complex by doing it this way?
Right.
And then as long as you are on a good path and keep like compressing and making changes to localize that complexity that you're always adding onto your projects, then it's fine that you're going to do a word injection world every, like on selection value change, as long as you go in and say, okay, I can see that we have this pattern now constantly. We should probably, yeah.
Awesome. Sounds good to me. All right, so we have someone that says Sevads Dani. Do you know how to say that?
Where are we looking?
Right below where you posted a link to GitHub.
Yeah.
From Victor.
Oh, Stevas. No, I don't know. That is not a Danish common sentence.
I wasn't sure if that was Danish or what. Let's see if we go to Google Translate here.
Also for the people that don't know, I am from Denmark and live in Denmark and
it's Danish. Hungarian. It means hi. It means hi in Hungarian.
Ah, nice.
Cool. Well, welcome from Hungary. So, do you like to play any instruments on your guitar? Or what do you like to play on your guitar? And Turbo, do you play any instruments? I'll just answer that quickly. No, I do not.
Well, I have a guitar. It doesn't actually mean that I know how to play. It means
it's a decorative guitar.
What?
It's a decorative guitar.
It's a decorative guitar. It's definitely, I did play it for like a good month, and then other things happens, and then I didn't get back to it yet.
Fair.
It's on my things to learn.
All right. Name a car for an edit. Name a car.
For an edit. A car. What is a fun one? I don't know. A Volkswagen something.
Volkswagen something. I'm gonna say let's do a classic Chevrolet Impala. How about that?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yes.
What kinds of cars do people drive in Copenhagen? Are they all like little tiny smart cars?
They even drive a car. That is there's a lot of public transport in Copenhagen, so generally speaking, you don't see that many cars other than transportation vans for companies to get all the groceries.
Interesting. Yeah, everyone just drives Teslas where I live.
Teslas here are very expensive because we have a high tax on any expensive cars. So, yeah, it's usually like what's a lot of German brands. You see a lot of German brands here.
That makes sense. BMW, Mercedes.
BMW, that kind of thing.
Cool. All right, well, let's get back to dots here. When will Unity develop C#+, the new data-oriented object-oriented language?
With HP C#, right?
Yeah.
It's already a C version of C#.
All right. Is it bad when you need dependency.complete after a job with the ECB?
Yeah, it is kind of like
Yeah.
I mean, I've definitely seen that a lot where people just put dependency.complete everywhere and like complete dependency everywhere because something doesn't work, and then they're like, oh, I can just quickly patch on that, fix it.
Yeah, that's what I did when I was starting to like learn ECS. I'm like, why am I getting all these red errors? Like, let me just try it. What if I put dependency.complete here? Oh, hey, the errors are gone. And then like I started thinking, I'm like, wait, this is like worse than just doing it like regular Unity game objects.
And that's one of the points where you can't just say that it's fine to do the thing that works for now. Like that will quickly bite you in the butt. You still have to like.
Right. Yeah. It's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, okay, you can maybe get away with it, but it's not something that you want to like keep doing over and over and over again.
Exactly. Like one of the rules in this book is also find the pebble that started the avalanche.
Wow, very poetic.
And like that's kind of the thing with complete dependency is if you're just gonna put on like what equates to a board with some nails on it and say complete dependency, like another pebble, like the pebble is still up there, it will still start the next avalanche. You haven't stopped the avalanche from starting, so you should most definitely go back and like figure out what was actually going on here. Why did I need that complete dependency, and
right,
which dependency is it actually that I am I have to wait on? Because usually that's the case, that you just forgot to put in a dependency.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I guess what it comes down to is again just like coming back to like really knowing what your data is and what your systems are, and when you're running systems that need to access that data, and how can you order things in such a way so that you don't have to force dependencies to completion, and they can kind of naturally complete.
One of the things that also kind of screw up that understanding for some people is the fact that the dependency manager that we have is only on a per system level. And so that means that the way the dependency manager works is that it for one system will know that you're accessing this set of components with read permission and this set of components with read-write permission. And so now per system that if I complete that system's state.dependency, I now get to have these components read permission and these components write permissions. But because you also only have that granularity, it means that say I were to in one on update, I have my iJob entity, and then I were to use an idiomatic for each underneath. That will likely cause you an error, because normally an idiomatic for each will try to complete, like if your system API query has local transform in it, let's say, ref RO local transform, it will complete any jobs writing to a local transform.
Yeah.
Right? But it will only it will ask the dependency manager to complete jobs that write to a local transform, and the dependency manager, for all it knows, is that this one previous system wrote to it, but it didn't know that the job that was just run above the idiomatic for each inside the system also wrote to the local transform, and so it wouldn't have had the dependency to complete that. And so in this case, you would definitely need to do state.dependency.complete, because it will complete the previous job, or you would just say complete that job. But that is only within that one system, and so it's fine because you're completing only that job. Because you use an idiomatic for each, right? Idiomatic for each are only main thread.
Correct.
So if they have you need it. But,
awesome. Yeah. That was a great answer to that. Let's see. If Unity would emerge from today, would you make ECS built-in right off the bat by default? I realize object-oriented programming C# is more friendly, but anyway, you should get used to Unity specifics even with standard OOP approach. Considering Bevy exists, etc., would you like to see Unity having fully optimized and constructed around ECS? So yeah, now that you've jumped ship, you're fully on the dark side, the data-oriented side. Would you prefer that Unity was data-oriented off the bat? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that by default, Unity already is kind of data-oriented off the bat today. Like, the concept of a game object isn't not object, like it's not object-oriented. It is really not like. In Unreal, what you have is something that is very object-oriented. Actors are a derivative of all their, like you specify up that componentship, but in Unity with a game object, you just set up a list of components, and that is very data-oriented.
Right.
The thing that makes it less data-oriented is when you start having those components be what is essentially an object, and that object then begins deriving all these informations down below it. And so there's nothing in ECS that inherently is object-oriented. And so I wouldn't actually say that I would change anything about how things are set up today. They already are.
Yeah. It's the essentially object component model where you kind of have your game object and you basically add components onto it, which is super nice for any of your designers or artists. They can go in there, they can add components to add functionality to different game objects. They can tweak values as they needed. They don't have to go to, the programmer of the team to request simple changes. They can do all those things without, hopefully without breaking anything. And so, yeah, it is kind of like I know for a while when there wasn't really any kind of mainstream ECS things like Unity ECS, Bevy, and all this. Like if you actually went on Wikipedia and looked at what ECS was, it listed Unity as an example of an entity component system, just because that was really the closest mainstream thing to an entity component system at the time. So yeah, but yeah, then what we were saying is now these components can have object oriented objects on them. So
yeah, exactly. So the only thing I would change is just have made the more clear separation of the declared data and what is
yeah. So I guess that kind of brings up an interesting question is could you make your own kind of more separated data from systems by just using say scriptable objects for all your data and then mono behaviors for your essentially systems?
You could, right?
Yeah.
but the thing that makes that hard is also that
so the systems are also all confined to individual game objects, and it's you're not really iterating across,
Yeah, exactly, and also
data oriented,
And also, wouldn't know where things are stored, and so it wouldn't really be data oriented.
Yeah. So yeah. It's close, but no cigar.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you write tests for your games? How would you approach unit integration performance for testing a game? Do you write tests for your games or code that you write in general?
I mean, yes. For the stuff that we write in general, we write tests for them, right?
For Unity, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But personally, I generally tend, for game projects specifically, I rarely tend to. But I also think, on the other hand, that ECS is a pattern that fits nicely with this approach, because we talked about earlier when we have these input components that basically refer to the input.
Yeah, exactly. You can just whip up an input component, throw it in, and make sure your output component is what you expect.
Exactly. It's literally just a matter of checking at that point that I'm just gonna set the components forward value as always being pressed.
Right. Yeah, and you don't have to like go through the trouble of like setting up all these kind of complex things. You can really test things in isolation a lot better.
Exactly.
Cool. Do you have any tips about writing tests? Because you like you say you write tests for things at your day job. Like, do you have any kind of tips or just kind of just do it?
I mean, not really. There's also it very much depends on which kinds of tests like which kinds of things you're actually wanting to test. A lot of the time it's the focus of your test shouldn't just be to test that one version of this works, but that the use case of actually also works. Like if I'm making a new feature for iJob entity that does the with all, I should probably also try to create an entity and do a with all. There's the normal approach, and like does these two actually have the same pattern? Yeah, and I also think this book makes some interesting points as well, because generally Sucker Punch's philosophy is more of a like they rarely ever use any unit tests, and instead they have very much a philosophy of code that doesn't run doesn't work, and so you should try to remove as much code as possible that is starting to rot, that a code path that is rarely being hit, and that you should make sure that the code paths actually exhibit all of the, like if you make a function, that function, like a huge failure case in a function is when you're trying to make something pre-abstract, you now also have made something that has a bazillion different inputs that it could possibly take. And so like, because it has all these inputs that it could possibly test, you can never really test all those cases.
Right.
Unless you start using all of those cases,
Yeah.
in which case now you've already added all the work in, and so it's fair enough that you're saying like this is more testable. And so there's one part is writing the unit test. Another thing is like why do you even need the unit test to begin with? And that is for the most part to ensure that that code path is being run in the case that you're expecting. And so for a game, a lot of the time it is a matter of like one part ensuring that you only write.
Yeah, things are happening in the correct order. You're in the correct expected state, everything like that.
Yeah, exactly, and that it is solving a narrow use case that you already know today that will be run, and then later on when a new thing pops up, then yeah, you can now expand that one function to take in more parameters, and now you already have a use case for that extra parameter that you added in. So there's like a synergy between like.
Cool. That sounds good to me. Do we still need to use ComponentType.read-only when making queries for iJob entity or automatic for each, or is it fine to just use typeof also for state.getEntityQuery?
I mean,
because doesn't typeof
system, you definitely cannot use typeof or getEntityQuery because that immediately stops you from being able to use what's it called,
burst. Yeah.
Typeof is a non-burstable approach because it returns type, and type is managed. So.
Gotcha. So prefer to use the ComponentType.read-only, ComponentType.read-write, all that.
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
And that's by the way, also another pattern that I tend to use is like instead of a big performance cost when you're doing like I spawn with entity manager to create entity, and then I'm going to do add component and another add component. Instead of doing all of that, use create archetype and pass in the correct component setup.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
go and set components. But then you've already set everything up correctly and spawned it correctly.
Yeah, totally. I think that's about all we have for chat right now. I do have a couple other random little points if you wanted to keep talking about a couple things.
Another one was he asked about get into jQuery and generally also personally recommends against not using get into jQuery and instead using both System API Query Builder and Entity Query Builder.
Yeah.
As they are, very equal and they work everywhere, and also, they clearly indicate what is happening.
Yeah, and also the thing with System API is it also like you can just kind of always use it the same, and then basically the code generation always gives you essentially the like most performant version of that, right? Because there are multiple ways that you can like get queries and get lookups and get components and everything like that. So yeah,
and also the fact that if you use System API .Query Builder in your own update, actually just anywhere that you use it, but it matters more for the inside of an update, then the actual like entire expression that you wrote out for like System API .Query Builder with all of this component with none of this component .builds, that entire expression, if you look at the source generated code for that, it just gets turned into my variable equals this field semicolon. And so
all
it's,
right.
As performant as copying over an entity query.
Yeah. Cool. Good to know. All right. Yeah. Do you want to keep chatting about some of the other random little things here? And none of these should be too crazy. I know it's kind of probably later for you, but you seem like you're still you seem like you're still rolling. What time is it for you now? What time is it for you now?
12:46 a.m.
Oh, okay, that's not that bad for you.
Yeah. It's only soon 1 a.m.
I know. I was telling you. I think last time that we talked, like I feel like every time I'm on Discord, I can send you a message, like literally any time of day, and you'll always like, "Oh, hey." I'm like, just get some sleep, dude. I know it's like 4 a.m. for you.
Yes. No.
All right, so here's kind of some of the random things I had. So subscenes, how much do you use like multiple subscenes? And do you have any kind of like particular workflows for like working with multiple subscenes, kind of loading them in and out, or do you pretty much just use like a single subscene? Because I'm still pretty much just single subscene in it.
I'm also pretty much only single subscening it. I do sometimes separate out, like have my player scene and like these are all my interactable scene, and then in a separate scene this is my actual environment. Okay.
What do you find is the advantage of doing it that way?
Just to like find like my worry, for instance, when I make a character controller, is that what happens if that character controller gets streamed in before my actual world? Well, I want to make sure that is not a problem, and so having separated them out, I now always have that test case. That's literally the only advantage, and I would also not recommend doing that at the start of a project, because that also means that you now have to cover that basis as at the start, right? So.
Fair. All right, cool. Because yeah, I know there's definitely like some cool things to do with like subscene streaming. Like, of course, that's what Mega City uses to kind of load things in procedurally. And I know there was that game that was showcased at GDC last year, Detonation Racing, where they talked about how like literally as you're driving around the track, they're like loading in new chunks of the track, and that's how they can get like good performance on mobile, because like only certain portions of the track were kind of loaded in at a given time.
And also, I don't know if you've noticed on the documentation page for like subscenes and materials and prefabs and so on, like it has gotten a lot better. And like,
okay, I'll have to revisit it
now, and like, this is what to do if you want to asynchronously load in a entity prefab. This is what you're gonna do if you want to load in a subscene.
Yeah. Actually, that brings up another question that I didn't have written down, but I know it's one that comes up kind of from time to time. Is like kind of prefab management. Like if you have, say, like a lot of different prefabs and you kind of want to like spawn in some kind of, random one of like, of the, 1,000 different prefabs that you have. Like, do you have any kind of good approaches to take for prefab management at scale?
Yeah, to use the content management system that they have, which I'll see if I can pop up. Okay, I'm good at pressing buttons.
And that's just all in the documentation now, right?
It is exactly in the documentation, which is what I'm going to show. Documentation. Boop, boop. Okay, switch over to it. Then
if one were
to go down to the workflow and then convert data, scenes, and they want to see what a subscene is and look at streaming in a subscene. And we were specifically talking about prefabs.
Yes, prefabs.
So content management, weekly reference. Actually, it is on the prefab somewhere in here. Not that. What if I just search prefab?
Prefabs and baking.
Prefabs and baking.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of like the basic about how to kind of do.
Because I definitely remember seeing it in here.
Yeah. Anyhow, if people want to find it, I think that might be a good place to look. Oh, and I didn't realize. I guess there was a new upgrade. Entities 1.0.11 now.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Looks like there's a couple things in here.
Yeah. Ilya did this thing. That's right. So you can now have generic eye systems.
Oh. What would be a good example use case for a generic eye system?
Well, System API actually supports type level generics.
By the way, your face is cut off right now.
Oh yeah. There you go.
That's a fun little starburst transition there.
Yeah. No, but like, what's it's called? Like a very hidden feature of System API is the fact that it supports generics as long as the generics is defined on the type that is using the System API. So, for instance, if you have if you're using System API in a system, that system generics is actually allowed to be used as part of your System API. So you can do System API.getComponentT, and then if that T is coming from the system itself.
Oh, okay.
That is completely caught by it. That is fine. Like every other case, it will give a compiler. Like System API will complain at you.
Gotcha.
A generic, but
okay,
not
interesting.
for systems themselves. And so this has been before only worked for system based, but now you can happily do. Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. See, the next thing I kind of had.
You have like a my attack system, fire attack, and water attack, and so on.
Okay. That could be handy. Might be something to look into a little bit. Let's see, I think we kind of talked already a little bit about like burst and kind of, things that you're doing for link to the change logs. Yeah, I got it right here. Let me go ahead and post that there. Boom, there you are. Multiplayer. Obviously, I know we've kind of talked about me wanting to get back into multiplayer soon. Have you been doing any messing around with multiplayer or investigation, or even just kind of playing around with some of the sample projects at all?
I haven't. No.
I know. I saw
there's
you.
enough to
I
prepare
saw
even without any multiplayer involved. I just get the nice screams every now and again from like like Netcode for entities sits like right forward to the left of us.
Okay.
And so it's nice to see every now and again when they come into us or we go over to them and look at some of the stuff they're working on, and they complain about some of the stuff we're working on.
I know you were playing around with the, or you did like a gameplay demo of the Mega City multiplayer. I saw you in one of the like preview videos they showcased of it. I saw your name above one of the flying ships.
Yes. No, that and now the multiplayer Mega City thing is finally out as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I kind of want to play around with it and maybe see if I could like set up a way that like we could get a bunch of people to kind of like do like a big test of it to see how it holds up.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot of fun.
Were you guys just doing it all local, or were you doing it over any Unity cloud services? Do you know, or are you able to talk on that at all?
It was using, I think, like UGS matchmaking something.
Okay, so it actually they actually had it running on like a Unity cloud server, and like everyone could connect to it from wherever.
Exactly, and also
Cool.
Vvox, which is like
yeah, the voice chat, yeah. Sweet.
Showcasing a lot of those features as well.
I know we kind of briefly mentioned aspects earlier. Do you use aspects much? And if so, are there any kind of things that you kind of use them for or not? I know aspects were something that I was definitely kind of like using a lot more, like when Entities 1.0 came out. I'm like, oh, this is a super nice feature. But I haven't been using them as much, but every once in a while I come across something where I'm like, oh, maybe this makes sense to kind of, group these things together, and I can kind of have some helper functions in here. So it's, kind of nice for some things, but I don't really use them as much as I maybe initially thought that I was going to use them.
A double-edged sort of kind of thing, deal again, where it's like, the nice thing about them is that they're component view. That's essentially what they are. They are like a grouping of a set of components and the related feature to that set of components.
Yeah.
And so, like, but it's also a double-edged sword, because what you end up with is you're going to pay a bit of like compilation cost, but you're also going to pay for syncing up that thing the entire time, even if you're only using like a small subset of it. And so if you were to like have your rocket aspect, and your rocket system is only ever changing the local transform of your rocket, then it might not make sense that you're constantly taking a read-write reference to the fuel or something like and that's exactly what aspects a lot of the time inquire, is that you if you have one system that is like defueling you constantly, and another system that is constantly moving the rocket forward, and both of those systems are just using the aspect directly, now you end up having like they both have to complete and take entire read-write ownership of the entire rocket.
Oh, interesting.
So like you definitely have to like think of when does it actually make sense to group up these sets of components, and like that generally happens when you've worked on a project and you can actually see, oh, well, actually I can see in this rocket frosting case, I'm always, doing these sets of things that's like rocket frosting, and then it makes sense that I'm grouping this feature set. But then it's again a feature set grouping, right? So, yeah.
Cool.
So
yeah.
that's why aspects generally, for me personally, don't end up happening that often, because components and the systems themselves kind of end up fulfilling that behavior.
Right. Yeah.
But there's a lot of things involved in it. There's obviously also the other one, which is if you're coming from a more object-oriented approach, then it's definitely more intuitive for them to like.
Yeah, that's kind of what Luke mentions in the chat right now. He says, I think if you use too many aspects and feature set grouping, you end up defeating the purpose of data-oriented code and composition. Makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
I saw the Kajiro was working on an ECS tutorial. Did you see that on Twitter at all? He's been kind of posting some preview things on there. He's the like Unity Japan tutorial guy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'm definitely looking forward to that one. It sounds like it's going to be coming out maybe within the next couple of days here.
Oh, I have only seen the like little dancing man that.
Yeah. I suppose we could pull that up real quick because it's kind of funny. It was something that I think he had originally made like a long time ago, and then recently upgraded it to a newer version. This is really small. Here, I'll just post the link in chat, and then people can go check that out. Anyhow, last question I had for you. What do you think Unity can do better? Hard-hitting questions here. Yeah, what do you think Unity can do better as far as just in general, or even with dots, or anything?
That's a tough question.
Oh yeah, we're already the best, so
yeah. Exactly. No, but I mean, like putting the right people in like the charge for a while, and like being able to steer in the same path. It's like it is like Gigaya was a really cool project, and then suddenly came nowhere. And like, yeah.
So just making sure everyone's on board for heading in the right direction. Basically, what you're saying.
Exactly. I mean, there isn't that many things I find overly bad at this point anymore. It's just
little things here and there that kind of need to be cleaned up, more or less.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
A common theme around the office right now is just the lack of meeting rooms.
You guys need to expand, get a bigger office. What do you think? How long have you guys been in that office? Like a long time?
No. We I think was it a year ago? We expanded into like a new area. They bought an additional part of the building.
Okay, gotcha.
They're renting an additional part of the building.
Gotcha. Nice.
That's generally how they expand, and then now they're gonna remove a staircase, I think it is, and then see if they can put some meeting rooms on top of that.
All right, looks like we actually do have one more question. Just slide in here real quick. How would you handle and store different level data, level 1, level 2, storing enemy prefabs, simulation data, and so on, and resetting the scene? So I think this, kind of gets into like scene management a little bit. Like if you kind of have these separate scenes. I know that was like one thing that I know I kind of had some difficulty with, just because the ECS world lives separately than like the Unity scene world. So when you load a new Unity scene, it doesn't like reset all your systems. So your on create methods, they've already been called and they're not going to get like called again. So if you have any kind of like initialization logic in there that maybe what to run at the beginning of a scene, just kind of like knowing that's not going to kind of run. But yeah, do you have any kind of thoughts on kind of scene management, level transitions, any of that?
I mean, it definitely depends on like the kind of data that you're storing here, because like when it comes to serializing blob assets, that's very easy. And
right,
so
because it's just data, yeah.
So if it's data that you don't plan on like changing that much, like for instance, you're making a Minecraft clone and you do all your procedural generation, those chunks you're probably only gonna store once, and so they can almost be a blob asset, right? And so I don't know what he means by enemy prefab.
Maybe just kind of like storing, where enemies maybe spawn in the world and things of that nature. I guess that's kind of how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like blob assets are kind of nice. You can also try to do. I think there's a function that is like move everything into a world and then try to steal that. There's definitely a thing that needs.
Caught it. I caught it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think like bovine labs, the thing that we talked about earlier with saving is a very interesting thing to look at, because it does do a lot of that saving for you, for like entire world streaming.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Well, and shout out to Diego in the chat. I see you there.
Oh, Diego's here.
Yeah, I met him at GDC earlier this year, so. Yeah, definitely. Well, that's pretty much all I had. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or bring up?
No. I mean, I'm just excited to see what you're gonna do next.
Yeah. Got some exciting coming up. All right, let's see. Actually, one thing came in here real quick. In the game Vampire Survivors, is it better to disable the enemies you killed and enable them again, like pooling, or just destroy and create them again? Destroying and creating them again is totally fine with the ECS pattern.
Yes.
Because pretty much with ECS the data is already allocated, so you're really just kind of like basically just kind of setting values or like removing a reference there. So not necessarily going into don't necessarily need to do any kind of pooling on that there.
Exactly. And like that's also like a common thing is like often a structural change can be kind of expensive if you're planning on doing many structural changes, and so it can actually be better to just create a new entity with the correct set of things on it and then start over from that instead.
Gotcha.
So actually, it's very, very common to do the destroy and create a new.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then you end up with no structural changes.
Ooh. Kind of. And I guess this guy clarifies. What I mean is, let's say a different zombie in different levels.
Okay. I'm making a game with. I'm making a clone of Plant vs Zombies, and in one level, I know that the 5th zombie that was born is my very harsh enemy zombie. Yeah, I mean, the way that I would generally do that is you can kind of do that with a backup. You can you store up the information you need for your scene, like the prefab order and like.
Right. Yeah. And just kind of
so on. Like you can have a prefab, like you make a subscene and you put in that subscene just a zombie spawn script offering, And what it does is it just stores up all of your positions and your enemies, and you can even make an editor.
Editor tooling, yeah.
That's gizmos everywhere, and that's all stored in the offering, and then it gets baked down to just a list of a tuple of this prefab spawned with this at this location with this health and so on. And that is entirely runtime ready, and it's just a matter of now having like 5 different of these prefabs, and they can even be in the same subscene for all that matters. It's just a matter of just spawning in one of those prefabs, right? And just not spawning in the dot of prefabs.
Yeah, totally. All right, well, we'll take this one last question here. Are there any benefits to using ECS if you can get consistently high frames per second anyways? Its performance benefits are always advertised. I was wondering if there are any other hidden benefits we don't know. This is something we talked we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I just want to kind of, we can close out on this where, basically I think one of the main benefits that we were talking about is just kind of having that separation of your data from your game logic. It leads to systems that, things are kind of much more isolated. You can test them better. It also makes things much more modular, so you can easily, add and remove features, and just kind of makes your code more robust to change over time. So I think those are some of the really great options.
One of the benefits is just like composability. The fact that you can now say this feature, put that in, and then put this feature in, and put this feature in, and then they kind of merge together.
Yeah,
nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there definitely are like a lot of other kind of benefits that come to like multiplayer specifically, and those are kind of, again, some topics that I'd like to explore in my kind of my dots multiplayer video. Just kind of like talking about, the doing like, client-side prediction and some of the, simulated rollback, and how, doing things in a data-oriented way just kind of lends itself to do that stuff a lot easier. All right.
CPU. So that guy that asks GPU
yes.
versus CPU.
Yeah. It's pretty much all CPU and memory optimizations are kind of the main things, and because you are doing CPU optimizations, you can send things to the GPU more efficiently, but it's not going to necessarily give you GPU performance boosts, if that makes sense. All right. Well, cool. That was an excellent stream. I had a ton of fun with that. We had a lot of really good questions in here. So thank you, everybody, for all your awesome questions. I think there were a lot of really thought-provoking stuff. This is definitely a stream that I'm going to be pointing people to for a while, just because there's a lot of good questions on here. And maybe I'll clip some of these out into some videos, because I think there were some good things in here that I might want to clip out. But yeah, Danny, thank you so much for coming on. I had a ton of fun today. Any words for the people? Can they find you online anywhere or anything to shout out?
I don't do things that often, but they can definitely find me on the Turbo Makes Games Discord, and my Twitter, I guess, as well, Dani4H5B. I think.
You have some interesting name on there. I tagged you in a couple posts, so you can find them through my Twitter, which is @TurboMakesGames.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I guess go like and subscribe this video.
Boom.
There
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a fantastic day. We'll see you in the next video, and hopefully some other cool live streams coming up as well. Take care, everybody.